Chapter 3755. Hearing that Ji Tianxing was busy with something big, Peng Fei did not feel depressed. Instead, he felt excited and expectant. He had a young and cheerful personality. He had the noble Golden Rock bloodline and talent, but he could not endure the boredom of cultivation. That was why he escaped from the 9 mystical grotto heaven and wandered the Star Source continent. After meeting Ji Tianxing, he followed Ji Tianxing everywhere. Now that he had been cultivating in seclusion for too long, he was already bored. Hearing Ji Tianxing's words, how could he let go of this opportunity? Young master, if you want to do something big, you can't do it alone. I'm willing to serve you like a dog and horse. I'm duty-bound to lead the troops. Ji Tianxing said calmly, although you've reached the 9th level of the Divine Lord realm, you're not a divine king. You can't help much. Peng Fei choked, but he did not give up. Young master, although I'm weak and can't charge into battle, I can stay by your side and help you plan. If not, I can run errands and pass on messages. Ji Tianxing was a little speechless. After a moment of silence he said, no need. Just cultivate in seclusion. When I need you, I'll summon you. All right. Peng Fei was like a deflated balloon, instantly becoming dispirited. Ji Tianxing ignored him and continued to use the power of the heaven-mending pearl to heal the godhead's injuries. Ever since the news of the battle in the Sky River mystic realm spread, the situation in the entire Star Source continent became very tense. The myriad demon alliance and the mystical grotto heaven, these two super forces, became the focus of billions of demons. Although all the demons in the Star Source continent knew that the rapidly rising myriad demon alliance would not be tolerated by the mystical grotto heaven, there would be a battle between these two super forces sooner or later. The winner would control the Star Source continent, and the loser would be reduced to ashes. When the time came, the battle between the two giants would bring endless turmoil and chaos to the Star Source continent. This was something that everyone was well aware of. However, no one could have predicted that because of Long Tian's appearance, the battle between the two giants would actually break out prematurely. Although countless forces and godly kings had not been able to witness the battle in the Sky River secret territory with their own eyes, however, the news circulating on the Star Source continent described the battle vividly. Especially when Alliance leader Luo Ho and the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor had destroyed the secret realm and perished together in the void. This had shocked everyone. Luckily, later on, news spread that those were merely the clones of the two powerhouses and not their original selves. Only then did the emotions of the hundreds of millions of people calm down, the shock in their hearts lessening by more than half. Even so, everyone knew very well that the Myriad Demon Alliance and the Enigma Utopia had already shed all pretense of cordiality. A great battle was imminent. What happened afterwards also proved this point. Over the past month, the 10,000 Demon Alliance had been preparing for the war actively. While shrinking the defense, they had also gathered their forces quickly. A few days later, after the news had spread, the Enigma Wonderland issued many orders to summon experts and experts. For an entire month, a storm was brewing on the Star Source continent. It was unknown how many Divine Lord experts and Divine King experts were gathering in the territories of the two major forces. The current situation was like the calm before the storm, with swords drawn and bows drawn. The forces and Divine Kings who had the ability and qualifications to participate in this battle were all thinking about what they should do. Should they help the 10,000 Demon Alliance? Or help the Enigma Wonderland? Or should they play it safe and watch from the sidelines? Every force and Divine King had their own choice. However, most people chose to watch from the sidelines. Even many of the territorial lords were no exception. Although they were Enigma Wonderland's subordinates and the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's subjects in name, they knew that they were the territorial lords. They had fought for the position of territorial lord themselves, and it was not bestowed upon them by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. Even if the 10,000 Demon Alliance destroyed the Enigma Wonderland and took control of the Starsource continent, they would still be the territorial lords. Of course, most experts and forces were not optimistic about the 10,000 Demon Alliance's chances. In their opinion, the Enigma Wonderland had controlled the Starsource continent for more than 20,000 years and was deeply rooted in the continent. Although the 10,000 Demon Alliance had risen very quickly and had many experts, they had not developed for long. Everyone guessed that the 10,000 Demon Alliance's chances of winning were not high. At most, it would not exceed 20%. As such, the various top forces and experts were already doing the 10,000 Demon Alliance a great favor by watching from the sidelines. As the days passed, the situation became more and more tense. The 10,000 Demon Alliance and the Enigma Wonderland started to clash and kill each other. Although it was only a small area of competition and friction, there were still many elite deaths. Many forces and experts knew that this was a test before the battle. An earth-shattering and bloody battle was about to begin. Fortunately, this was the Dragon Realm, the world of the demon race. This was the oldest race since the creation of the world. They had grown up in wars of blood and fire. They believed in the law of the jungle. Even if the two giants were about to fight, and the people of the Starsource continent would be plunged into misery and suffering, no one felt that it was inappropriate. No one would jump out and accuse the 10,000 Demon Alliance and the Enigma Wonderland of ignoring the lives of the people. Another half a month passed. Ji Tianxing had been in seclusion for another 2 years to heal his injuries in the twisted spacetime. The Tao injury of his divine spark had been completely healed, and he was back to his peak condition. Moreover, he had improved the level 5 of the heaven-punishing divine skill even more. His strength had increased imperceptibly compared to before. Today was the day he came out of seclusion. Outside the secret chamber, the left and right protectors and the chief of internal affairs had been waiting for a long time. Creak, creak, creak. The stone door of the secret chamber opened, and Ji Tianxing walked out in a white robe. Tang Wu, Lan Qi, and Fu Ergu quickly bowed and said in unison, "Welcome back, young master." Ji Tianxing looked at them with a smile. Seeing the fatigue in their eyes, he could not help but say, "You guys have worked hard for the past month." The three of them quickly said that it was not hard at all. It was their duty to serve the 10,000 Demon Alliance and carry out missions for the young master. Both sides exchanged greetings, and Ji Tianxing asked, "How are your preparations?" Fu Ergu quickly replied, reporting to young master, "The basic preparations are done. Even the 2 secret bases have been investigated. We did not alert the enemy. Now, the tens of thousands of soldiers under our command are gathered in the 3 regions and outside the 10,000 Demon City. They are waiting for your order." Ji Tianxing nodded in satisfaction and said, "That's good. Then we don't have to waste any more time. Prepare for war. Fu Ergu will be in charge of the 10,000 Demon City. I will personally lead a few elders and a group of soldiers to take the lead. The left and right protectors will lead a few elders and a group of soldiers." As early as more than a month ago, Ji Tianxing had wanted to fight this battle. Of course, he had been prepared for it. Therefore, he directly gave the order to split up without hesitation. Chapter 3756. The tens of thousands of soldiers gathered by the Myriad Demon Alliance were divided into 4 groups. The Chief of Internal Affairs led a group of elites to guard the Myriad Demon City and defend with all their might. This was to prevent Xuanji Grotto from attacking the Myriad Demon Alliance's headquarters in desperation. The other 3 groups of soldiers gathered in 3 different regions and were on standby at any time. The 3 regions were all in the south of the Myriad Demon City. They were arranged from west to east, forming an invisible line of defense that faced Xuanji Grotto in the center of the continent. Originally, the left and right protectors and the elders all thought that Ji Tianxing would order the 3 groups to attack the various strongholds of the divine star field. But no one expected that he would split the troops into two groups and leave one group of soldiers on standby. However, his prestige was very high now. No one questioned or opposed his orders. 2 hours later, Ji Tianqing, the left and right protectors, the elders, and the 9 heavenly kings left the myriad demon city. Following Ji Tianqing were Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the 3 heavenly kings. Hu Xinyue personally piloted a divine ship and flew the group to the south. Inside the divine ship, besides the God King experts, there were close to 100 upper God Lords. They were all elite experts. The group went ahead and rushed to the stronghold of the Anan region to meet up with the soldiers. The stronghold of the Anan region had already gathered 12 God King experts and over 2,000 God Lord experts. Ji Tianqing would lead the soldiers to attack one of the strongholds of Xuanji Grotto. The divine ship sped high in the sky. Over 100 God Lord experts were circulating their energy in the hall, conserving their energy. Ao Jinying and the 3 heavenly kings should be like Ji Tianqing, cultivating in the secret room. However, only Ji Tianqing was calm and at ease, cultivating in the secret room. Ao Jinying and the 3 heavenly kings were all in the meeting room, discussing tactics and countermeasures in low voices. The 4 of them had a hint of worry and apprehension between their brows. God King Wanli, who was wearing dark golden armor and a helmet, said in a low voice, "Although we all know that young master is very powerful and not weaker than the old alliance chief, we have too few people. However, we have too few people. The group of soldiers that we are about to meet up with is also the weakest of the 3 groups. If we take the lead and attack one of their strongholds, I'm afraid we'll suffer heavy casualties." A month ago, God King Wanli confessed in public and was stripped of his position and rewards by Ji Tianqing. After that, he even received 100 lightning whip. He was beaten until he was riddled with scars and was in so much pain that he wished he was dead. Even today, he was still a criminal. He followed everyone to battle in order to atone for his crimes. However, after that incident, he no longer resented Ji Tianqing. Instead, he respected and admired him even more. This time, he was the one who volunteered to follow Ji Tianqing into battle. Everyone knew what he was thinking. He wanted Ji Tianqing to see his sincerity and attitude of repentance by performing meritorious deeds. Hearing his worrisome words, the 2 heavenly kings felt the same way and nodded. Ao Jinying waved his hand and hurriedly pacified them, explaining, "You all don't need to worry. Young Lord never does things that he isn't confident in. Just with Young Lord alone, he can slaughter all of Profound Secrets Grotto's several dozen divine kings. Moreover, Young Lord actually has several divine king powerhouses with decent strength by his side. Everyone, rest assured. If we follow Young Lord, we'll definitely be victorious in battle, sweeping away all obstacles." Finished talking, he looked at God King Wanli with a slight smile again and encouraged, "Eldest brother, as long as you fight valiantly and don't let Young Lord down, after this war, you'll definitely be able to make illustrious contributions and wash away your previous crimes, regaining your position." God King Wanli was stunned for a moment before nodding his head to express that he understood. The other 2 heavenly kings' expressions were clearly much more relaxed and even revealed looks of sudden realization. "I was wondering why Young Lord only brought the few of us and dared to take the lead and set off for battle. So that's how it is. Young Lord has several divine kings following him. His own strength also reached the peak. Therefore, he only brought the few of us and has full confidence. The other elders and heavenly kings all followed the left and right protectors to take action. This way, the strength of their troops along the way is also very strong. Only then can Young Lord set his mind at ease." Knowing Ji Tianqing's trump cards and plans, everyone's apprehensions and worries were all dispelled. They all revolved their skills and regulated their breathing, conserving their strength. Behind Ji Tianqing and the rest, roughly several 100,000 miles away, was the divine ship that left Protector Tang Wu steered. There were more people in this divine ship. Apart from the left and right protectors, there were also 5 elders and 6 great heavenly kings. Of course, there were also 200 elite high-rank divine lords accompanying in the divine ship. Following Ji Tianqing's instructions, they were to rush to the ancient Maple Domain's stronghold and rendezvous with the soldiers there. In the ancient Maple Domain's stronghold, 17 divine kings and over 4,000 divine lord realm experts had long gathered. Up until now, the orders that the left and right protectors received were limited to this. They still did not know which stronghold of profound secrets grotto they were going to attack. Before they set off, the left and right protectors had asked this question before. But Ji Tianqing said that war was a matter of countless changes in an instant. They only needed to make a rough plan. There was no need to be meticulous to every step. To win, the most important thing was to adapt to the situation. The left and right protectors felt that this was very reasonable. Even they did not know which stronghold they were going to attack, much less profound secrets grotto. Only in this way would they be able to launch a surprise attack in the future. After understanding these principles, the left and right protectors carried out their mission seriously. They only needed to secretly rush to the ancient Maple Domain and rendezvous with that batch of soldiers. Then, they would make all the preparations and wait for Ji Tianqing's orders at any time. Killing and conquering were their business, while strategizing was Ji Tianqing's business. They had absolute trust in Ji Tianqing and also believed that with Ji Tianqing leading everyone, they would definitely be able to defeat Profound Secrets Grotto. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. On this evening, the warship that Hu Xinyue steered smoothly arrived at the secret stronghold in the Annan domain. Ji Tianqing led 2 elders and 3 heavenly kings, and very quickly, they received more than 2,000 soldiers. These 2,000 over divine lord realm experts had 12 divine king powerhouses as generals. Most of them were transferred from the various branches of the Myriad Demon League. In other words, 80% of these soldiers were from the Myriad Demon League. Only 20% were conscripted from the subsidiary forces. Understanding this point, the smart Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying immediately understood Ji Tianqing's intention. The two of them looked at each other and discussed secretly via voice transmission. No wonder young master did not choose the other 2 groups of soldiers but chose this group with the least number of soldiers. So this is the reason. Of course, young master has always been far-sighted and sees things more clearly than us. Although young master is very strong and has high prestige in the league, he has only joined the league for a short period of time after all. I'm afraid the various branches and subsidiary forces of the league do not have any impression of him. In this way, it will be very difficult for them to cooperate during the battle. It will also be very difficult to transmit orders smoothly. That's right. These 2,000 soldiers are all members of the league. Of course, they are loyal and devoted. We can also help young master to contact and deploy them. This way, he will be able to command them like his own arm and display the greatest combat strength. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3757. Late at night. Annan region, in the mountains outside Elephant State City, in an ancient and quiet house. More than 2,000 divine lord experts lay in wait, patiently waiting for orders. No one made a ruckus. The main hall in the middle of the house was lit. Ji Tianqing sat at the head of the table, while Hu Xinyue stood by his side. Ao Jinying, the 3 heavenly kings, and the 12 divine kings guarding this place all stood quietly in the main hall. The atmosphere was heavy and solemn because everyone knew that the war was about to begin. Ji Tianqing said with a dignified expression, "Grand Elder has already introduced this king's identity, so I won't repeat it here. I've already informed all of you of our intentions and this king's plan in advance. Now, this king will announce something. Within 2 hours, the teams will be redistributed. After 2 hours, we will depart." The news that came out of nowhere made the dozen over divine king powerhouses all stunned. Especially the 12 divine kings. They all looked up at Ji Tianqing in disbelief. After a while, everyone reacted and hurriedly tried to dissuade him. Acting alliance leader, isn't this a little too hasty? Everyone just rushed over from the headquarters. It's been a long and tiring journey. You should rest for a few days before going to war. Acting alliance leader, we should prepare for a few more days. At the very least, there's a process of getting to know each other and getting to know each other. Otherwise, once the war starts, if the general doesn't know his soldiers, and the soldiers don't know his general, how will we fight? The 12 divine kings all expressed their objections, full of worry. However, Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the 3 heavenly kings did not express their opinions, and their expressions did not change in the slightest. Ji Tianqing raised his hand, indicating for everyone to be quiet. He continued, "This king and the left and right protectors will split up and leave Myriad Demon City to head south. Although our movements are concealed, the mysterious Grotto Heaven's spies will definitely find out. At this time, our route and traces should already be known by the mysterious Grotto Heaven. Logically speaking, the mysterious Grotto Heaven will start to mobilize and take precautions against us launching a surprise attack in a few days. If we really rest and get to know each other for a few days, wouldn't it be exactly what the mysterious Grotto Heaven wants? What is a surprise attack? We must catch them by surprise and catch them off guard." Only after hearing his explanation did the 12 divine kings calm down. The doubts in their hearts were gradually dispelled. Hu Xinyue also chimed in, "Leading an army into battle is not a one-on-one battle. Of course, there needs to be strategy and stratagems. This is exactly what young Lord is good at." The young master had only appeared in the Starsource continent this year and rarely showed himself. The Enigma Grotto doesn't understand the young master's personality and style at all. This is our advantage. The 12 God Kings all felt that this was reasonable, and they couldn't help but nod in agreement. Thus, everyone accepted Ji Tianqing's decision. Ji Tianqing continued, "We are new here, so we don't know the more than 2,000 officers and soldiers, so it is difficult for us to command and mobilize them. However, you 12 God Kings have interacted with them for a long time. You should know them well. Therefore, the 2,000 people will be divided into 6 teams, which will be led by the 12 of you. However, you have to choose 4 vanguard teams with stronger strength, assisted by Ao Jinying and the 3 heavenly kings, and wait for this king's orders at any time. Great Elder Hu Xinyue will follow me in case of any sudden situations. She will have to act according to the situation and support you at any time. This king will take the lead to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold and eliminate the enemy's leader and God King powerhouses. When this king gives the order, the 4 vanguard teams will follow behind to kill the enemy. The last 2 teams will act as support and be sure to kill all the escapees. No fish can escape the net." This arrangement was not novel or shocking. It could only be said that it was the most common strategy. The 12 God Kings naturally had no objections and nodded in agreement. However, a few God Kings asked the most crucial question. "Acting Alliance Master, which stronghold of the Enigma Grotto is the target of our surprise attack tonight?" "Acting Alliance Master, we are still very far from the Divine Star Domain. There are 2 domains in between. Even if we attack at our fastest speed, we will only arrive at midnight tomorrow. In terms of distance, the closest enemy stronghold to us is the Divine Star Domain's White Jade Empire. The Xianfeng Empire's stronghold is slightly further away from us. As for the other 2 strongholds, they are even further away from us. On the contrary, they are closer to the ancient Maple Domain. Acting Alliance Master, this subordinate suggests attacking the White Jade Empire's stronghold." After the God Kings finished speaking, Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said indifferently, "As for which stronghold to attack, it is still too early to say. Everyone need not worry too much. In any case, you should have inquired about the 2 strongholds of the White Jade Empire and Xianfeng Empire, so you should not be unfamiliar with them. What you need to do now is to integrate the teams as soon as possible and confirm the connections between the top and bottom. Seeing that he still did not reveal the target of the attack, the 12 God Kings looked at each other and secretly transmitted their voices to discuss. Isn't this acting alliance master too cautious? Is he afraid that there are spies among us 2,000 people and will leak the news in advance? If he is afraid that those monarchs will leak the news, he can just tell us God Kings. We will definitely keep our mouths shut. Could it be that the acting alliance master does not even fully trust us? That should be the case. Although we have been in the alliance for hundreds of years and have always been loyal, this is the first time we have met the acting alliance master. Actually, it is good for the acting alliance master to be cautious. After all, this battle concerns the fate of the alliance. There must not be any mistakes. Just like this, everyone left the assembly hall with complicated thoughts and emotions and went to integrate the teams. Ji Tianxing gave Ao Jinying and the 3 heavenly kings a look. The 4 of them immediately understood and hurriedly left the assembly hall. Soon, only Hu Xinyue and Ji Tianxing were left in the assembly hall. Because of Qian Yu, Ji Tianxing trusted Hu Xinyue more. In the past few months since he entered the Myriad Demon Alliance, Hu Xinyue had taken care of and guided Qian Yu in every possible way. Qian Yu benefited greatly and was about to break through to the Divine King realm. Moreover, Hu Xinyue's mind was exquisite and she was very good at reading people's minds. She was the kind of person who could see through people's thoughts with just a hint. With her by his side, Ji Tianxing could save a lot of time and effort. Young master, are you worried that there are spies among these people? Will they leak our target? She stood beside the throne and looked through the door at the many figures in the square outside the assembly hall. She sent a voice transmission to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing did not answer. He only asked with a playful smile, "Then guess which stronghold I will attack first?" Hu Xinyue thought seriously and analyzed. Tonight is the first battle of the Alliance to attack the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. The result of this battle not only concerns the morale of the tens of thousands of people in the Alliance, but also attracts the attention of all the major forces in the world. Therefore, we can only win and not lose. And we have to win beautifully. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. There was a hint of appreciation in his smiling eyes, and he signaled for her to continue. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3758. Hu Xinyue was encouraged and became more confident. She continued to analyze. In theory, attacking the nearest White Jade Empire has the highest chance of success. However, this is too normal and not in line with young master's style. Moreover, the people in that stronghold may have noticed it in advance and be on full alert. Therefore, the possibility of young master bypassing White Jade Empire and quietly attacking Xianfeng Empire is higher. Ji Tianxing had originally thought that Hu Xinyue's analysis would end here. Unexpectedly, Hu Xinyue continued, "Since I can guess this, the experts of Xuanji Grotto Heaven are not stupid. They may also guess this result. Therefore, Xianfeng Empire's stronghold is very likely to be fully defended and become an impenetrable fortress. In this way, young master's choice to attack White Jade Empire is still the best choice." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing could not help but show a look of admiration. He nodded and said, "Very good. As expected of the Heavenly Fox, you actually guessed what I was thinking. That's right. Whether it is attacking White Jade Empire or Xianfeng Empire's stronghold, there is a corresponding reason. This war is actually just a game between me and Xuanji Grotto Heaven's commander. The defensive situation of each stronghold and the combat strength of each army are only of reference value and have no decisive effect." Hu Xinyue thought for a moment and said with a smile, "No matter what, I have full confidence in young master. No matter which stronghold young master attacks, you will definitely win easily. The only difference is how many losses we will have. Moreover, young master will definitely eliminate the 4 strongholds outside Xuanji Grotto Heaven as soon as possible. Your real target is Xuanji Grotto Heaven." Ji Tianxing took a deep look at her, then nodded slightly and said, "You have the potential to be a military advisor." Hu Xinhua bowed and said with a smile, "Young master is too kind." In the past, the old alliance master did not ask about government affairs and left the affairs of the alliance to Sir Manager and his subordinate. After handling all kinds of trivial matters, I naturally have experience. Ji Tianxing nodded again and said encouragingly, "Very good. In the future, when I leave, you will still have to work hard to help Alliance Master Luo Ho come up with plans to stabilize Starsource Continent." Hu Xinhua was shocked. She did not expect young master to be so certain that he could destroy Xuanji Grotto Heaven and control Starsource Continent. However, she suppressed the shock in her heart and tried her best to remain calm. She bowed and said, "This subordinate will follow young master's instructions. All right, it's time for us to depart." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else. He stood up and left the throne, walking out of the hall. 2 hours later, over 2,000 Divine Lord experts were divided into 6 teams, each led by 12 Divine Kings. Among them, 4 of the more numerous vanguard groups were personally overseen by Ao Jinying and the 3 Heavenly Kings. Everything was done according to Ji Tianxing's instructions. Everyone successfully completed the task and ensured that Ji Tianxing's orders could be quickly conveyed. Midnight came and everyone set off. All the God Kings and generals thought that Ji Tianxing would have everyone board 6 divine ships, so that they could travel faster and more discreetly. However, to everyone's surprise, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a beam of divine light, summoning a huge pitch-black divine clock. Shwa! The 300-meter-tall primordial chaos bell floated in the pitch-black night sky, flashing with a faint golden light. Back when Tao Yongxing had this divine artifact, it was a weapon filled with blood and killing. Now that Ji Tianxing had refined it, it had become a sacred object flashing with golden light, filled with righteousness. This divine clock was a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact, a Khanate treasure from before the ancient times. There was, of course, another universe inside the divine clock, forming a world of its own. That world was at least 10 billion miles wide, about 10 times bigger than the world inside the Burial of Heaven sword. However, in this vast world, there were no intelligent races. There were only endless mountains and rivers, land and forests, as well as rich cultivation resources. Tao Yongxing probably didn't cultivate any faith power, so he didn't have any people or believers. As long as Ji Tianxing wanted to, he could take billions of people to live in that world at any time. However, he wouldn't do that at the moment. He would only use it as a backup resource vault. Shwa! 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 The 6 teams of Divine Lords were still looking up at the divine clock, guessing Ji Tianxing's intention. Ji Tianxing had already controlled the primordial chaos bell to release 6 beams of divine light, enveloping the 6 teams. After a flash of divine light, more than 2,000 Divine Lords were sucked into the divine clock world and landed in different areas. Many Divine Lords and Divine Kings were familiar with the internal world of the divine artifact. Therefore, they didn't seem to panic when they landed in an unfamiliar environment. The 6 teams were still lined up neatly, silently sizing up and observing their surroundings. At that moment, Ji Tianxing's voice sounded in the divine clock world, and the 6 teams heard it clearly. "Rest at ease and wait for my orders." Therefore, the 12 Divine Kings and Ao Jinying led the 2,000 Divine Lords to meditate and cultivate, patiently waiting for orders. Outside the divine clock, only Ji Tianxing and Hu Xinhua were left in the house. Hu Xinhua saw everyone enter the divine clock with her own eyes and soon understood Ji Tianxing's intention. She couldn't help but show an expression of admiration. "Young master, this is a good move. If we use 6 divine ships to travel, it won't be fast enough and the risk will be greater. Now that you are using the divine clock to take everyone on the journey, not only can you avoid unnecessary discussions and doubts, but it is also very flexible. It is really a foolproof plan." Ji Tianxing only smiled at Hu Xinyue's heartfelt flattery and didn't say anything. Immediately, he brought Hu Xinyue into the primordial chaos bell and appeared in a secret chamber. This secret chamber was the core of the primordial chaos bell, and all the formations were gathered here. Ji Tianxing sat down in the middle of the formation plate. With a thought, he controlled the divine clock to fly into the night sky and rushed in the direction of the White Jade Empire. Hu Xinyue stood behind him respectfully, silently waiting on him. Seeing that she was still a little reserved, Ji Tianxing said indifferently, "It will take a few hours to reach there. Rest at ease and rest." Hu Xinyue acknowledged and sat down to regulate her breathing, maintaining her peak condition. Originally, the various divine kings needed an entire day to reach the White Jade Empire on their divine ship. But the primordial chaos bell's flying speed was comparable to a peak divine king, covering thousands of miles in an instant. At most, everyone would reach the White Jade Empire in 12 hours. This saved half the time compared to everyone traveling on their divine ships. The pitch-black divine clock shrunk to the size of a sesame seed. It flickered continuously in the sky and was very concealed. Every time it flickered, it could cross thousands of miles. It was equivalent to teleporting continuously. Moreover, its size was too small. There were no spatial fluctuations when it flew. Even if a divine king expert passed by nearby, it would be difficult to detect its existence. Under such circumstances, the spies of the mysterious grotto heaven couldn't detect the tracks of Ji Tianxing and the rest. Only in this way could they truly achieve an unexpected effect. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3759. 12 hours was equivalent to half a day. Ji Tianxing departed at midnight. Now that he had crossed a region, it was noon the next day when he arrived at the White Jade Empire. The sun was high in the sky and the air was scorching hot. A county city in the White Jade Empire was in a tense and gloomy atmosphere. Outside the county city, in the mountains 50,000 miles to the south, there was a group of temporary palaces. A heaven and earth formation with a radius of 10,000 miles enveloped the palaces, protecting them and making them invisible. This was a temporary base for the godly lords and godly kings under the command of the Xuanji Grotto. These godly lords and godly kings came from different regions in the north of the continent and belonged to different forces. However, they were all subordinate forces of the Xuanji Grotto and had to follow the orders of the Xuanji Grotto to fight against the invasion of the Myriad Demon League. Because of their low status, they were not qualified to enter the Xuanji Grotto, so they could only gather here and wait for orders. In the middle of the palaces, there was a teleportation divine formation in the most majestic palace that led to the vicinity of Sky Crane Mountain. Now that this base was in danger, they could retreat to the vicinity of Sky Crane Mountain and call for reinforcements from the Xuanji Grotto. Of course, the other three bases were the same. This was the suggestion of the Xuanji Grotto's commander, the War Dragon King. This way, the Xuanji Grotto could maintain contact with the four bases and be more flexible, allowing them to retreat and advance at will. The godly lords and godly kings of the four strongholds were naturally moved to tears. They also felt more confident and confident. In their eyes, this was the Xuanji Grotto's way of taking care of them. The Xuanji Grotto treated them as citizens and not as fighters that could be abandoned at any time. The current base was protected by the heaven and earth formation and was invisible as usual. There were large groups of guards patrolling both inside and outside the base, guarding all the important roads. The security was very tight. At the peak of a certain mountain, in the most majestic divine palace, over 20 divine king experts were currently gathered together to discuss important matters. They had just received news that the Myriad Demon League's army had departed and split into two groups heading south. It was either last night or today that the two groups of troops would arrive at the Myriad Demon League's base and meet up with a large group of soldiers. Therefore, the Myriad Demon League's army would invade in 2 days at the latest. More than 20 God King generals were currently discussing how to deal with the situation. What the crowd didn't know was that a black dot the size of a sesame seed had already arrived in the sky above the mountains. This sesame was none other than the primordial chaos bell. It hid its body and aura, quietly floating in the sky. Let alone the patrolling guards in the outpost below, even the god-kings in the outpost did not sense anything amiss. Even though this stronghold was enveloped by the heaven and earth divine formation, it was still very dangerous. However, Ji Tianqing, who was sitting in the god clock, could still see through the heaven and earth divine formation and see the palaces in the stronghold after using the god eye mystic technique. His expression was calm and unhurried as he patiently observed the defensive situation of the stronghold. A high king-level defensive divine formation should have been set up by a dozen god-kings working together. Even if I were to act personally, it would take me at least 2 hours to decipher it. There were more than 20 godly king auras in the stronghold, and they were all gathered in the divine palace in the center. There were a total of 4,000 divine lord realm experts. Furthermore, the number of middle-level and high-level divine lords was on the high side. As expected of the overlord of the continent, the Xuanji Grotto's foundation is really deep. Ji Tianqing looked at the stronghold below and muttered to himself. Hu Xinyue had already finished recuperating. She stood behind him respectfully and said, "Actually, the Xuanji Grotto's foundation is far beyond our imagination. The territorial lords of the hundreds of territories and all the demon clan citizens are nominally the citizens of the Xuanji Grotto. However, in reality, the forces and experts that truly belong to the Xuanji Grotto are less than 10% of the entire continent. Even so, the Xuanji Grotto's forces are still 10 times stronger than our league. However, many of the territorial lords and top forces only follow the orders of the Gold Source Dragon Emperor. This time, the Gold Source Dragon Emperor's clone was destroyed and they lost their supreme overlord status. That's why the Xuanji Grotto's rallying power was reduced by more than half. Most of the forces and experts that belong to the Xuanji Grotto used all sorts of reasons to avoid participating in this war. Therefore, the Xuanji Grotto only gathered about 20,000 Divine Lord Realm experts and 200 Divine Lord Realm experts. Even so, their numbers are twice as many as ours. Speaking of this, Hu Xinyue smiled bitterly and said, "If the Gold Source Dragon Emperor comes back and gives the order personally, the forces that he can mobilize will be several times more than what they have now. If that's the case, our league will not even have the slightest bit of fighting spirit and will collapse before the war even starts." Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "Therefore, now is the best time to destroy the Xuanji Grotto. Once we miss it, there won't be another chance." After a short while, he used a secret technique to investigate the situation in the stronghold. The strength of this stronghold is not bad. There are 26 Divine Lords. Among them, there are 2 7th-degree realm upper-level Divine Lords and 10 intermediate-level Divine Lord. 4,000 Divine Lord realm experts are evenly distributed in 8 directions. They can gather at any time. Their defense is almost flawless. Hearing him say this, Hu Xinyue was a little worried and asked, "Young master, should we attack immediately or wait for an opportunity?" Ji Tianqing smiled meaningfully and said, "Those divine lords are having a meeting. I guess they are discussing how to fight in a few days. They will not expect us to be here." Hu Xinyue immediately understood what he meant. She took out the purple gold whip with a serious expression and quickly accumulated divine power in her body. Ji Tianqing did not say anything and launched an attack without any warning. Swoosh! The sesame-sized primordial chaos bell instantly expanded by billions of times and became a few thousand feet tall like a lofty mountain. The divine bell gave off a bright golden light like a scorching sun. It carried a destructive power and smashed down on the heaven and earth divine array below. This scene was like a golden scorching sun crashing down like a meteor crashing into the earth. Kaboom! The invisible heaven and earth divine array was instantly smashed into pieces by the divine bell. Billions of divine light shards burst out. Incomparably violent shockwaves carried boundless divine light as they spread out in all directions. In the blink of an eye, the mountains within a few thousand miles were razed to the ground. The divine lords and divine lords in the stronghold were caught off guard and were immediately annihilated. Rumble! With a loud bang that shook the 9 heavens, the primordial chaos bell smashed into the mountains. The area within a few thousand miles was razed to the ground. Hundreds of palaces that were protected by divine arrays were also smashed into ruins, leaving behind countless dilapidated walls. At least 600 divine lords were still cultivating and regulating their breathing when they were smashed to death. Not even their corpses were left. There were more than 1,000 divine lords who were injured. In an instant, the entire stronghold was in chaos. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3760. The sudden attack and the scene of the falling sun caused thousands of divine sovereigns to be inexplicably terrified. No one was prepared for the sudden attack of the myriad demon alliance's army. Furthermore, it was not a frontal assault, but a sneak attack by the top experts. These thousands of divine lords had been preparing for battle for a month. They had long been mentally prepared to charge, and even die on the battlefield. They were not afraid of the army's charge or a battle to the death. However, they were afraid of unknown experts and unknown offensive method. For a time, everyone was in a state of panic and chaos. Within a radius of tens of thousands of miles, the world was filled with dust and a storm of divine light, turning chaotic. The 3,000 divine lords who survived let out fearful cries and roars as they ran around randomly. Only the divine palace in the middle was relatively well preserved. There were still a few walls and the cracked underground palace left. The 20 godly kings who were in a meeting reacted in time and worked together to cast a spell to protect the teleportation divine array in the underground palace. It did not matter if the divine palace was destroyed or if hundreds of divine lords were killed instantly. As long as the teleportation divine array in the underground palace was preserved, they could retreat to the vicinity of Mount Sky Crane and seek the protection of Xuanji Grotto Heaven. The myriad demon alliance's army is here. Meet the enemy. No matter what, we have to hold them off for a while. Lead the soldiers to meet the enemy. I will go and activate the teleportation divine array now. We have already lost the initiative. We cannot win this battle. We can only delay them for a while before retreating to Mount Sky Crane. Why would the myriad demon alliance's army attack 3 days in advance? Quickly spread the news. These godly kings worked together to protect the teleportation divine array in the underground palace and resist the divine bell's attack. They were all injured to varying degrees. However, they were all overlords. Even in such a chaotic situation, they were able to maintain their composure and quickly make the correct response. Soon, 20 godly kings rushed out despite their injuries and gathered the divine lords to meet the enemy. A few other godly kings entered the underground palace to activate the teleportation divine array. However, right at that moment, something that no one had expected occurred once again. The pitch-black divine bell that was tens of thousands of feet tall expanded by a few thousand times. Swoosh! The divine bell became incomparably huge, covering the sky and the sun as it pressed down, covering a radius of 30,000 miles. The ruins, including more than 3,000 divine lords and more than 20 godly monarchs, had been suppressed by the chaos primordial bell. In fact, this was the strategy that Ji Tianxing had thought of from the very beginning. A long time ago, he had thought of a problem. Although the Jiutian Tenju Pagoda was miraculous and useful, it was Ji Ku's natal divine weapon. He could borrow it for a while, but he could not rely on it forever. He had to have a powerful divine weapon of his own. After obtaining the primordial chaos bell, he tried his best to refine it. A month ago, he had finally refined it completely and gained full control of it. Only then did he decide to attack the Xuanji Grotto. This was a divine clock, so it was destined that its attack power was not strong enough. However, its defensive and suppressive abilities were top-notch. As long as he was willing, the divine bell would not only suppress 30,000 miles, it could even seal off 300,000 miles with ease. The space sealed by the divine bell was isolated from the outside world, and he was the master of this space. Buzz, buzz. Under his control, the divine bell glowed with golden light and released an endless amount of pressure, ruthlessly suppressing over 3,000 Ser Gods. The Ser Gods, who were running in panic and fear, suddenly felt as if they were stuck in a quagmire. They could not move an inch, and their combat power rapidly weakened. At this moment, Ji Tianxing gave the order to attack. Ao Jinying, a dozen godly kings, and more than 2,000 Ser Gods had been meditating in the divine bell world. It had only been 12 hours, and many of them had only managed to circulate their energy for a full cycle. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing's voice rang out in the divine bell world, spreading to every corner. Everyone, prepare for battle. The 2,000 Ser Gods of the 6 teams immediately woke up. Without any hesitation, they immediately ended their cultivation, took out their divine weapons, and accumulated their divine power to the peak. The next moment, a huge spatial tunnel appeared above the heads of the 4 vanguard teams. Ji Tianxing's order rang out again. Godly King Wanli, take your team to the southwest and kill all the enemies with all your might. Ao Jinying, your target is the southeast. Heavenly King Shui, your target is the south. 4 orders were passed down to the 4 vanguard teams. After the 4 teams received the orders, they immediately passed through the spatial tunnel and left the divine bell world. Swish, swish, swish. The next moment, the 2,000 people of the 4 teams appeared in 4 different directions of the battlefield. When everyone saw the situation in front of them, they were all dumbfounded. They were so shocked that their mouths were agape. All they saw was darkness within a radius of 30,000 miles, surrounded by the pitch-black divine bell barrier. Obviously, this area was enveloped by the divine bell, and this enemy's stronghold had become a desolate ruin. The world was filled with dust and divine light. Terrified, desperate, and weak enemies could be seen everywhere. Although there were more enemies, more than 3,400 people, they were at their peak. However, they were at their peak condition, while the enemy was panicking, defeated, and weak. Was there any suspense in this battle? With this thought, the 2,000 Ser Gods and 12 godly kings were full of respect and admiration for the acting leader. While the Ser Gods were still in a daze, godly King Wanli, Ao Jinying, and the others had already woken up and immediately gave the order to attack. Therefore, the 4 teams let out inspiring cries and charged into the battlefield with murderous intent. Kill! Charge! Kill all the enemies! We won't let the acting leader down. The next moment, the 2,000 Ser Gods charged forward without any regard for their own safety. The world lit up with endless divine art, light and shadows, erupting with deafening sounds. The enemies who were still in shock could not even use half of their combat strength under the suppression of the primordial chaos bell. The result was self-evident. This was a one-sided massacre. Every moment, many divine Lord Masters were killed. Some of them fell into pools of blood, some of them disintegrated into ash. Blood filled the sky on the battlefield as shouts shook the heavens. In less than 100 breaths of time, the enemies were killed to the point of throwing away their armor and fleeing for their lives. At this moment, the 2 support teams in the Divine Bell world passed through the spatial tunnel and appeared in the corners of the battlefield. Their mission was simple. They only needed to kill the enemies who had collapsed and fled. The battlefield was enveloped by the Divine Bell, and no one could escape. However, Ji Tianxing had a request. They had to end the battle in the shortest time possible. Therefore, killing the defeated soldiers was a race against time. They could not slack off. 15 minutes later, more than half of the 3,000 Ser Gods from Xuanji Grotto Heaven had been killed. The remaining 1,000 Ser Gods, who were covered in wounds, retreated to the center of the battlefield under the lead of a dozen godly kings, near the divine palace. They wanted to use the teleportation array in the underground palace to retreat to the vicinity of Sky Crane Mountain. However, a few roars of despair came from the underground palace, making everyone despair. The teleportation array actually lost its effect. Chapter 3761. The teleportation array in the underground palace was rather complicated. Several godly kings worked together to cast it, but it took them several minutes to activate it. When the blazing white spatial tunnel appeared, everyone saw the hope of survival. They were all excited and their blood boiled. However, when they led many godly lords into the spatial tunnel, they found that the teleportation array did not react at all. The godly kings were extremely anxious. They hurriedly checked the teleportation array. After checking, they found that the teleportation array was normal. However, the space within a radius of 30,000 miles was sealed. No matter how powerful the teleportation array was, it could not break through the invisible sealing power. Therefore, the teleportation array had failed. This undoubtedly meant that the thousands of godly lords and dozens of godly kings present had become turtles in a jar. For a moment, everyone fell into despair. Their hearts were enveloped by the haze of death. After a while, the two godly kings were the first to calm down. They looked around and saw the thousands of wounded godly lords and dozens of injured godly kings. They cried out in grief and indignation. "Everyone, this place has been sealed by a powerful enemy. Our teleportation array has failed. No one can escape. Since we are trapped here, we can't just sit around and wait for death. Even if we are destined to die in battle, we have to drag a few down with us and perish together with the enemy. Everyone, you have to believe that the mysterious grotto will not mistreat its loyal members. Even if we die here, we will receive honor and respect. As for our sects, families, and friends, they will all receive preferential treatment and comfort from the mysterious grotto." Without a doubt, the words of the two godly kings struck a chord in everyone's hearts. Everyone knew that they would definitely die today. They could not escape even if they had wings. Since they were going to die either way, they had to die a worthy death. Therefore, the thousands of godly lords and dozens of godly kings changed their despair and pessimism. Their fighting spirit was reignited. Everyone roared and waved their divine weapons. They charged in all directions without any regard for their own safety. They engaged in an intense battle with the myriad demon alliance members who had surrounded them. The two sides were once again engaged in a fierce battle. Divine light filled the sky and loud explosions rang out incessantly. Seeing that the remnants of the mysterious grotto did not crumble or surrender, but instead ignited an even stronger fighting spirit, everyone was very surprised. Aogening, the three heavenly kings, and the 12 godly kings could not help but discuss. "It's really strange. Those fellows from before were like stray dogs without any fighting spirit and were easily defeated by us. Now that they've fallen into a desperate situation, they've risen to fight back with high fighting spirit. This is the final struggle of a trapped beast, the final struggle of a dying beast. Everyone, be careful. These people are prepared to die. Don't fall into their trap." Under the command of Aogening and God King Wanli, the 4 vanguard teams slowly approached the underground palace in the middle of the battlefield from different directions. Facing over 1,000 Sir Gods who were fighting like cornered beasts, the group fought steadily and steadily. They were neither anxious nor impatient. In fact, at appropriate times, they would even retreat temporarily to avoid heavy casualties. In any case, the outcome of this battle had already been decided. The 10,000 Demon Alliance was bound to win, but the exact number of casualties was still unknown. The mission of God King Wanli and Aogening was to reduce the casualties of the Alliance as much as possible and win this battle beautifully. This tactic was indeed effective. No matter how hard the Divine Lords of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven fought, the 10,000 Demon Alliance always retreated. As time passed, the Divine Lords of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven were killed one after another. The dozen or so divine kings of the Xuanji Grotto heaven quickly saw through God King Wanli and Ao Jiniying's tactic. They were unable to restrain their anger and were driven mad with rage. The two high-level God Kings, in particular, took out their natal divine artifacts and used their trump cards to attack the members of the Myriad Demon Alliance. The light of the divine arts covered the sky and carried with it the power to destroy everything. It was about to land on the crowd. It was impossible for the 10,000 demon leagues, Sir Gods, to withstand the attacks of two high-level God Kings. Soon, hundreds of divine lords would be killed on the spot. God King Wanli and Ao Jiniying roared angrily and immediately tried to block. But at this moment, a cold and majestic voice suddenly sounded above the battlefield. "Bastard, you're courting death." As this cold voice sounded, a white-robed youth from the Dragon Clan descended from the sky with a heavenly fox woman. God King Wanli and Ao Jiniying calmed down when they saw the two of them. They quickly gave up on the idea of helping and continued to deal with the middle and lower divine kings. The white-robed youth waved his hand and golden light splashed out and turned into millions of golden divine swords. The heavenly fox woman also waved her purple golden whip and created millions of moonlight divine light. Bam bam bam! As earth-shattering sounds exploded, the attacks of the two upper divine kings were neutralized by Ji Tianxing and Hu Xinyue. The divine arts that filled the sky were destroyed and turned into countless divine light fragments that scattered on the battlefield. When the two high-level god kings saw Ji Tianxing and Hu Xinyue, they felt their powerful and unfathomable auras and were instantly filled with fear. They lost their will to fight and quickly retreated into the distance. Who are those two? Why are they so powerful? They are definitely 8th or 9th realm divine kings. They must be the top experts of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. I think the Heavenly Foxwoman is most likely the great elder of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. That white-robed youth from the Dragon Clan, is he the legendary Long Tian? It's over. The great elder of the 10,000 Demon Alliance is not someone we can deal with. Long Tian is even more powerful. The two divine kings communicated with each other through voice transmission as they retreated. Although the two of them had spoken clearly and logically to the defeated soldiers as if they were going to die generously. However, in reality, experts at their level all viewed their lives as extremely important. None of them were willing to give up on it so easily. Even if it was embarrassing to escape, they could not care less. The two of them used their invisibility secret technique and desperately fled to the edge of the battlefield. Although the battlefield had been sealed by the huge black bell, they still wanted to try their luck. However, when the two of them fled to the edge of the battlefield and were 3,000 miles away from the dark divine bell rampart, a white light suddenly lit up in front of them. Swoosh! As the white light flashed, Ji Tianxing's figure suddenly appeared. He held the sword of burial of heaven and stabbed toward them. One of them could not dodge in time. The space around him was sealed and his divine power was suppressed. He could not resist at all. With a muffled poof, the sword of burial of heaven instantly pierced through the forehead of the divine king. The tip of the sword emerged from the back of his head. Not only did the sword of burial of heaven pierce through his head, it also destroyed his godhead and killed him on the spot. His body suddenly stiffened and his pupils became slack. The vitality in his body quickly disappeared. The other high-level divine king witnessed his companion being instantly killed on the spot with his own eyes, and he was immediately scared out of his wits. Chapter 3762. Just as this high-level god king was filled with fear and shock, Hu Xinyue had already arrived. She silently appeared behind this god king and waved the purple-gold whip with all her might. It was like a long spear piercing towards the back of this person's head. This god king was very experienced in battle. He sensed danger approaching but did not turn back to look. He desperately broke free from the restraints of space and moved 1,000 feet to the left. Crack! The space around him shattered as he moved out on the spot. He brushed past the purple gold whip and avoided the fatal blow. However, in order to break free from the restraints of space, he also paid a great price. Just as he steadied himself, he spat out a mouthful of blood and looked dispirited. Even so, Ji Tianqing and Hu Xinyue had a whole new level of respect for him for being able to dodge Hu Xinyue's attack. However, no matter how much respect they had for him, his ending was already set. Swish! Without waiting for this person to regain his senses, Ji Tianqing appeared behind him out of thin air. The pitch-black buried heaven sword silently pierced through his head and came out from his forehead. This person was instantly petrified. His body froze on the spot as his eyes widened in shock. His life force quickly disappeared. The sword of burial of heaven destroyed his consciousness and destroyed his godhead, instantly killing him. Just like that, he followed in the footsteps of his companion and died on the spot. Ji Tianqing shook his wrist and retrieved the sword of burial of heaven. At the same time, he took out a dozen godhead fragments. He shot out a beam of golden light from his left hand and snatched this person's interspatial ring. Then, he turned and left. Seeing that he was very familiar with this set of actions and was as smooth as flowing water, Hu Xinyue was amazed. She was very impressed. "Young master, you are still the best. You killed him in one hit." Seeing that Ji Tianqing turned and flew back to the battlefield, Hu Xinyue quickly followed and praised him from the bottom of her heart. Ji Tianqing did not reply. He only silently kept the two high-level God King's godhead fragments and interspatial rings. Soon, the two of them returned to the center of the battlefield, right above the underground palace. Although the battle had already come to an end, more than half of the remaining cultivators of the Xuanji Wonderland were slain. There were still over 300 godly monarchs and 9 godly king experts who were still resisting stubbornly. However, Ji Tianqing estimated that if God King Wanli, Ao Jinying, and the others fought steadily, they would probably need another 100 breaths of time to finish. Therefore, he and Hu Xinyue attacked together, using all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills. Very quickly, they killed those middle and lower divine kings. The 9 god kings had been killed, and their godhead fragments and spatial rings had been quietly harvested by Ji Tianqing. The 300 over gods that were lucky enough to survive did not last more than 10 breaths of time under the encirclement of many divine king experts before they were all slaughtered. Just like that, the war ended quickly. The 4,000 gods and over 20 divine kings that were guarding the stronghold were all killed. With the primordial chaos bell suppressing this place, not only was no one able to escape, even news could not be sent out. In other words, this stronghold had been quickly destroyed by Ji Tianqing and was still in a secret state. It would probably take half a day or a day for the Xuanji Wonderland to not be able to contact the generals here, only then would they discover the abnormality. After the war ended, Ji Tianqing stood high in the sky, quietly watching the battlefield below. He took out a communication jade slip. After entering a message, he manipulated the primordial chaos bell to open a gap and sent out the jade slip. This message was for the left and right protectors. Just last night, the left and right protectors led that group of soldiers and arrived at the designated stronghold. Now that a few hours had passed, Ji Tianqing believed that they had successfully received the soldiers in the stronghold and should be ready. Therefore, the order he gave to the left and right protectors was to immediately lead the soldiers and launch an attack. The 2 strongholds of the Xuanji Wonderland that were closer to them were in the northeast of the divine star field. No matter which stronghold the left and right protectors led the soldiers to attack, they would be able to achieve an unexpected effect. Although Ji Tianqing's message in the jade slip was relatively simple, Ji Tianqing's message was quite simple. However, he believed in the talents of the left and right protectors. They would definitely arrange everything properly and would not let him down. At the same time, Divine King Wanli, Ao Jinying, and the others led more than 2,000 gods to clean up the battlefield and collect the spoils of war. Hu Hushinua led 2 support teams and was searching around the battlefield to see if there were any fish that had escaped the net. Ji Tianxing waited patiently for an hour before everything ended. More than 2,000 Sir Gods lined up neatly into 6 teams and waited for orders on the battlefield. Although many of them were injured, their faces were covered in blood and they looked very miserable. However, all the soldiers were in high spirits and their faces were filled with excitement and pride. Everyone looked up at Ji Tianxing in the sky, their eyes filled with respect and admiration. After this battle, everyone firmly remembered the demeanor of the acting alliance master. If it were not for the acting leader's valiant strength and methods, how could they have won so easily and so beautifully? Ji Tianxing spoke a few words of encouragement before casting a spell to control the primordial chaos bell. He sent the 6 teams into the divine bell world for them to recuperate. In the sky, only the 10 divine kings, Ao Jinying, Hushinua, and the 3 heavenly kings were left. These generals all looked at Ji Tianxing, their eyes filled with respect and awe. Ji Tianxing said calmly, "First, report the casualties." "Yes, sir." Ao Jinying and Divine King Wanli bowed at the same time and then began to report. "Young Master, we have wiped out the enemy in this battle. There were about 4,060 people, including 26 Divine King experts. None of them survived or escaped. Young Master, we have suffered very little losses in this battle. 2 Divine Kings and more than 260 Sir Gods died in battle. More than 800 Sir Gods were injured. Compared to our results, this battle can be said to be a complete victory. It was a beautiful victory." After listening to the 2's reports, Ji Tianxing nodded with satisfaction and said, "Everyone has worked hard in this battle. I will reward you according to your contributions later. May all divine kings return to the divine bell world to recuperate and urge the soldiers to recover their strength as soon as possible. This is because we still have a bloody battle a day later. Everyone cannot let down their guard." Ao Jinying and the other divine kings immediately understood what he meant. After this battle, not only did he not allow the soldiers to rest, he also wanted to destroy another stronghold in one go. He was too confident. However, after today's great victory, everyone was filled with respect and admiration for Ji Tianxing. No one dared to raise any objections. In fact, everyone was thinking that since it was decided on behalf of the Alliance Master, then it must be 100% certain. Swoosh! Ji Tianxing opened the space tunnel of the primordial chaos bell. The divine kings passed through the tunnel and returned to the divine bell world to recuperate. Only Ji Tianxing and Hushinua were left in the sky. Hushinua hesitated for a moment before asking, "Young Master, we have won this battle. If the news spreads, it will shock the entire Starsource continent. By then, the morale of the Alliance will reach its peak, while the prestige of the Xuanji Grotto will hit rock bottom. Do you want to?" Chapter 3763. Before Hushinua could finish her words, Ji Tianxing understood what she meant and waved his hand to deny it. "If you want to increase the fame and prestige of our alliance, you can do it at any time. There's no need to rush. The reason why I sealed this place and didn't let anyone escape is to keep it a secret. Only in this way can we destroy the next stronghold in the shortest time possible. When we kill our way into Xuanji Grotto Heaven, we will announce to the world that we have destroyed the 4 strongholds with thunderous means. This will also increase the morale and prestige of the Alliance." Hearing this, Hushinua's face revealed a cruel expression. She quickly bowed and said, "I was reckless. I will follow your instructions." Ji Tianxing didn't say much. He waved his hand and recalled the huge primordial chaos bell. Swoosh! After a few breaths, the primordial chaos bell, which was 30,000 miles in radius, shrunk to about 1 foot tall. Ji Tianxing brought Hushinua into the divine clock. He controlled the divine clock to fly into the sky and quickly left. The divine clock flew high in the sky. Just like before, it shrunk to the size of a sesame seed and traveled 10,000 miles in an instant. Ji Tianxing and Hu Xinyue stayed in the secret room of the divine clock. Ji Tianxing sat in the middle of the disc array and closed his eyes to rest. Just like before, Hu Xinyue sat behind him and silently circulated her qi to regulate her breathing. 10 hours after the divine clock left, the ruins that were 30,000 miles in radius attracted the attention of the nearby immortals. There was a county city not far from the ruins. There were a few immortal lord experts in the city. Late at night, one of the immortal lord experts went out to do something and happened to pass by the ruins. Although he was 20,000 miles away, the immortal lord could still sense that the surroundings were filled with violent and powerful divine aura. Surprised, the immortal lord carefully searched the surroundings. Not long after, he saw a huge and eye-catching ruin amidst the towering mountains and lofty ridges. The destructive divine power aura was emanating from the ruins. The immortal lord gathered his courage and carefully approached the ruins. He looked around the ruins. Although the battlefield had been cleaned up by more than 2,000 immortal lords, there were no divine weapons or immortal lord remains left. However, the earth was in a state of devastation. Shocking scars could be seen everywhere. The divine sovereign was alarmed. After careful inspection, he confirmed that a world-shaking battle had taken place here, and it had happened not too long ago. Terrified, the Sir God no longer cared about what he had to do. He hurried back to the county city and reported the news to the princess. That princess was a high divine lord and was a subordinate of the god Star Region Lord. She could be considered a direct descendant of the mysterious grotto. He did not know that the god-kings of the profound paradise had set up a stronghold in the wilderness outside the provincial city. With his strength and status, he was not qualified to know the inside story. However, he was keenly aware that something big must have happened. He then thought of the recent tense situation and the various rumors on the continent. He immediately thought that it must have something to do with the war between the Myriad Demon League and the enigmatic Utopia. Thus, after the princess personally went to the scene to check the situation, she reported the news to the Divine Star Region Master. The mysterious paradise was located in the center of the God Star Field, so the God Star Field Master was naturally the most loyal servant of the mysterious paradise. Moreover, with his status and strength, he naturally knew the truth. When he found out that the stronghold had been turned into ruins and there was not a single person in sight, he was so frightened that he broke out in cold sweat. He was petrified. He knew very well that there were 4,000 divine lords and over 20 god-kings in the stronghold. Those were the experts and experts gathered from the various regions in the north. They were the powerful forces under the command of the mysterious paradise and the vanguard to attack the Myriad Demon League in the future. Now, without any warning or news, the stronghold had been silently destroyed. How terrifying was this! The God Star Region Master woke up from his shock and fear. His first reaction was to report this to the mysterious paradise's commander. Thus, when the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu found out about this, it was already 14 hours after the incident. The two commanders had been recuperating in the mysterious paradise and did not easily show themselves. Therefore, very few people knew how badly they were injured. The soldiers of the mysterious paradise only felt that with the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu in charge, they could rest easy. However, no one knew that when the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu found out about this, they were so scared that their faces turned pale and their eyes were filled with fear. A stronghold had been destroyed and 4,000 divine lords had been slaughtered. This was not enough to stun them, much less cause them to be so scared. What really made them panic was that this had happened so suddenly. There was no warning, no clue, no news. It happened just like that. Everyone in the stronghold was killed. Not a single person was left alive. Moreover, no one had been able to send out a warning or call for help. This was too terrifying. In the brightly lit study, The Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu looked at each other and saw the cold sweat on each other's foreheads. How is this possible? The news is fake, right? No matter how strong the Myriad Demon League is, they couldn't have arrived so quickly and destroyed a stronghold in such a short time. The news was reported by the God Star Region Master, so it shouldn't be fake. However, I can't figure out how they did it. 4,000 divine lords and over 20 god kings. They were all killed and not a single one escaped? Even if they couldn't escape, why couldn't they send out a call for help? Also, all 4 strongholds had teleportation divine arrays. Once there was an emergency, they could retreat to Sky Crane Mountain. Why didn't the people in that stronghold use the teleportation divine array to retreat in time? I can't figure it out. This doesn't make sense. The 2 commanders analyzed and discussed. The more they thought about it, the more terrified they felt. In fact, they couldn't think of anyone who could have such a shocking method. In the next moment, the 2 of them looked at each other and shouted at the same time, could it be Luoho Divine King himself? In their opinion, only a peak Divine King with a supreme-grade King-level divine artifact could create such a miracle. The moment they thought of this, the 2 of them became even more flustered. It's over. Luoho Divine King secretly returned to the Myriad Demon League and personally led an attack. If His Majesty Dragon Emperor doesn't come back, our mystical grotto heaven will really be destroyed. Now is not the time to discuss this. Since Luoho Divine King destroyed the White Jade Empire's stronghold, he might be rushing to another stronghold. That's right. Luoho Divine King quietly destroyed that stronghold without leaking any news. He must be planning to continue the sneak attack. Send a message to the Xianfeng Empire's stronghold now. Tell them not to hesitate and immediately retreat to Sky Crane Mountain. The 2 of them realized this problem and immediately took out their communication jade slips and sent an order to the Divine Kings guarding the Xianfeng Empire's stronghold. However, what Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu did not expect was that Ji Tianxing had already arrived at the Xianfeng Empire's stronghold. Chapter 3764. Within the Xianfeng Empire, there was a vast primeval forest in the southwest. There were many mountains in the forest and the terrain was dangerous. It was a paradise for monsters and beasts. There were many powerful beasts of the monarch god realm here. The common people and ordinary gods did not dare to come close. Therefore, the few counties near the primeval forest did not know that a large number of experts had been stationed here a month ago and built a secret stronghold in the depths of the primeval forest. The stronghold was among the mountains. There were more than 100 palaces and houses scattered among the dozens of mountains. It was protected by a large array with a radius of 10,000 miles. The Upper King level Heaven and Earth Divine array not only had a strong defense, it also had the effect of invisibility. It covered all the buildings in the array. Looking from the outside, one could only see many mountains and forests. There were no palaces or people. The situation of this stronghold was basically the same as the one in the White Jade Empire. They were both protected by the Defense Divine Array. There was a teleportation divine array in the depths of the palaces that led to the vicinity of the Sky Crane Mountain. If there was a difference, it would be that the number of Monarch God and God King experts guarding this stronghold was more than the one in the White Jade Empire. There were more than 4,800 Monarch Gods and 30 God Kings. Such a powerful force would be an unstoppable torrent when they attacked the Myriad Demon Alliance in the north in the future. Although the God King commanders guarding this stronghold had not received any news or movements from the Myriad Demon Alliance. However, everyone remained vigilant and focused their attention on guard. Once they found something unusual near the stronghold, the patrolling guards and hidden sentries would immediately report the situation. The 30 God King experts were also ready to lead the troops to battle at any time. However, at this moment, a sesame-sized black dot silently arrived above the stronghold. This black dot was naturally the primordial chaos spell. It hid its tracks and aura. Even if a higher god king passed by nearby, he would not be able to detect its existence. Therefore, it quietly floated above the stronghold and was not discovered by anyone. Ji Tianxing sat in the central secret chamber of the god clock. He secretly used the God Eye secret technique to pass through the invisible defense divine array to check the situation in the stronghold. With his previous experience, it was a walk in the park for him to do this. After a quarter of an hour, he figured out the situation in the stronghold, including the number of experts and the arrangement of the defenses. Next, it was time to repeat the same trick. The sesame-sized primordial chaos bell suddenly expanded billions of times, turning into a huge bell that covered the sky. It shone with dazzling golden light and smashed down from the sky. At that instant, many godly lords and godly kings in the stronghold witnessed this scene with their own eyes. It was like a golden sun falling from the sky and smashing into the stronghold. Everyone was dumbfounded. They were so scared that they were dumbfounded, and their minds went blank. Even though a few god kings were determined, they returned to their senses very soon. They hurriedly roared out furiously and anxiously, calling for everyone to work together to stop the attack. However, it was too late. Boom! A thunderous boom suddenly exploded between the heavens and the earth, shaking the heavens. Under the full force of the primordial chaos bell, the heaven and earth divine formation that spanned thousands of miles only lasted for a breath before it was smashed into pieces. The peerlessly terrifying force of impact, along with the endless fragments of divine light, burst out in all directions. All the palaces and buildings in the stronghold were destroyed in an instant. Hundreds of mountains within thousands of miles were flattened to the ground. The world was filled with endless dust and divine light. It was chaos. The entire stronghold descended into chaos. More than 900 unlucky godly lords were killed on the spot by the primordial chaos bell. More than 1,000 people were severely injured, but they were lucky to survive. However, this was only the beginning of the disaster. Just as the godly kings roared and called for everyone to gather and work together to stop the enemy's attack, the primordial chaos bell expanded by 2 times and enveloped them. 1. As a result, the primordial chaos bell enveloped everything within a 20,000-mile radius, sealing the space. The 30 godly kings had a clear division of labor. Most of them waved their weapons and gathered the panicked godly lords to work together to fight back. Even though they had yet to find the enemy and only saw a pitch-black bell coming down, this did not stop them from doing so. They split into more than 20 teams and worked together to resist the suppression of the primordial chaos bell. There were also 2 godly kings. When they realized that a powerful enemy was coming, they immediately took out their communication jade slips to report the situation to abstruse Grotto Heaven. However, when they sent out their communication jade slips, they realized that the jade slips could not be sent out. The space was completely sealed by the primordial chaos bell. They could not send out any messages, nor could they send any messages from the outside world. In other words, they were isolated from the outside world. Immediately, panic, anxiety, and worry took over the minds of the 2 godly kings. They tried a few times but still could not send out any messages. The 2 of them could only give up temporarily. They hurriedly summoned a few godly kings and entered the depths of the ruins together. They wanted to work together to open the teleportation array in the underground palace. The enemy's strength had exceeded their expectations and imagination. As of now, they could only hope that the teleportation array could bring them out of this place and back to MT Sky Crane. Therefore, 8 godly kings went to the underground palace to open the teleportation array. 22 godly kings led the army into battle. Swoosh! Swoosh! The primordial chaos bell opened 4 spatial passageways. Ao Genieing, godly king Wanli, and company led the 4 teams out of the primordial chaos bell world and descended onto the battlefield. They followed Ji Tianxing's instructions and charged into the battlefield from 4 different directions. They killed the enemy like a hot knife through butter. 22 godly kings led more than 3,000 godly kings to launch a counterattack. However, they were suppressed by the power of the primordial chaos spell. It was difficult for them to move and their combat power was greatly reduced. The morale of the two sides was different and the combat power they displayed was also different. Therefore, although the Myriad Demon Alliance had fewer people, their combat power was stronger and they quickly gained the upper hand. Immediately after, Ji Tianxing and Hu Xinyue also joined the battle. The two peak experts crisscrossed through the battlefield, constantly reaping the lives of god kings one after another. Those middle-level and low-level godly kings were no match for the two of them. In just a short period of time, more than half of the 22 godly kings were killed. Only 9 of them were still holding on bitterly. In addition, Ji Tianxing, Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, godly king Wanli, and company used their ultimate moves that could destroy heaven and earth. They blasted into the enemy's battle formation. Every ultimate move would kill dozens or hundreds of godly kings and turn them into ashes on the spot. The battle lasted for 15 minutes before it came to an end. More than half of the 3,000 godly kings were killed and so were the 22 godly kings. The 800 godly kings who were lucky enough to survive were scared out of their wit. They no longer had any will to fight and fled into the underground palace. They wanted to escape through the teleportation array. However, when they entered the underground palace, they realized that the teleportation array had also stopped working. Then, the army of the Myriad Demon Alliance surrounded them and began the final massacre. End of chapter. Chapter 3765. Half an hour later. The battlefield covered by the primordial chaos spell had been reduced to ruins. Within a radius of 20,000 miles, all the mountains and rivers had disappeared, leaving only a desolated land of yellow sand. The war had ended and the stronghold had been completely destroyed. Divine King Wanli, Ao Jinying, Hu Xinyue and the others were leading the soldiers to clean up the battlefield. Ji Tianxing stood alone in the sky and looked down silently. The 30 divine kings who were stationed here had been killed. Their godhead fragments and interspatial rings had also fallen into Ji Tianxing's hands. These were the spoils of war that he needed. As for the spoils of war after the 4,000 divine kings were killed, he was not interested in them and left them to the soldiers. Therefore, cleaning up the battlefield after every war was the most exciting moment for the soldiers. Even if they were severely injured and extremely weak, they were still excited and in high spirit. With the generous spoils of war as a reward and stimulation, they were no longer afraid of fighting. Instead, they looked forward to it. This was definitely one of the best ways to raise morale. Another 2 hours passed. Under the leadership of the dozen divine kings, the soldiers finished cleaning up the battlefield. All the spoils of war had been collected and distributed to the divine kings according to their merits. The corpses of the enemies left on the battlefield were also burned by the soldiers. After doing all this, the soldiers returned to the 6 teams and were summoned back to the Divine Bell World by Ji Tianxing to recuperate and heal their injuries. Only Divine King Wanli, Ao Jinying and Hu Xinyue stayed behind and followed Ji Tianxing. Our mission has been completed. Next, it's up to the 2 protectors. As he spoke, Ji Tianxing cast a spell and put away the primordial chaos spell. Swoosh! The divine bell shrank rapidly and soon became 1 foot tall. It floated in front of Ji Tianxing. Hu Xinyue cupped her hands and said, "Young master has ordered the 2 protectors to lead the troops to attack a stronghold. It has been 16 hours. They should have completed the mission, right?" Ao Jinying nodded in agreement and said, "I will send a message to the 2 protectors to ask about the situation." With that, he sent 2 communication jade slips to the left and right protectors. Ji Tianxing and the others stood in the sky, patiently waiting. A full 100 breaths later, Ao Jinying finally received a message from the left and right protectors. After reading the contents of the communication jade slip, he reported to Ji Tianxing, reporting to young master, "The 2 protectors have followed your orders and led the army to attack a stronghold. The situation is just as you expected. The two protectors are cautious and careful, and they launched a surprise attack. They will definitely win this battle. However, the other party's resistance was abnormally tenacious, and they were still fighting fiercely. However, the battle was already nearing its end, and he believed that it would end within 2 hours. At that time, the two protectors will give you a detailed battle report. After listening to Ao Jinying's report, Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said with a solemn expression, "They have the upper hand, but they still haven't finished the battle for such a long time." It seemed that the resistance of that stronghold was indeed very strong. Furthermore, the two protectors didn't have supreme-grade divine artifacts in hand, so it was very difficult to stop the other party from asking for help and escaping. Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the Wanli Divine King all nodded in agreement. The Wanli Divine King revealed a bitter smile and said, "Although the two protectors are powerful and will definitely win this battle, however, it is absolutely impossible for them to annihilate all the enemies in the stronghold like us and not leak the news. If young master didn't take action personally, no one would be able to create such a miracle." Although his words seemed to be flattering, they were also stating the truth. Ao Jinying and Hu Xinyue felt the same and nodded in agreement. Ji Tianxing didn't say much. After pondering for a moment, he asked, "Ao Jinying, where is the fourth stronghold? How far is it from us?" Ao Jinying was stunned for a moment and vaguely guessed his thoughts. He quickly replied, "Reporting to young master, the fourth stronghold is in the southeast of the divine star field. It is 20 hours away from us. That stronghold is closest to Sky Crane Mountain." After he finished speaking, Hu Xinyue and he asked at the same time, "Young master, are we going to rush to the fourth stronghold and take advantage of the situation to destroy it?" The Wanli Divine King also guessed this possibility and immediately looked at Ji Tianxing with bright eyes. Ji Tianxing didn't hide and explained, "When we set off from the Demon City, we split into 2 groups and each group was in charge of 2 strongholds. Based on the current situation, we have quickly destroyed 2 strongholds and didn't expose our whereabouts. However, the 2 protectors can't annihilate all the enemies and can't keep it a secret. Therefore, the Xuanji Grotto Heaven has already received the news. I guess they will send reinforcements or ask the people in the fourth stronghold to retreat. If we wait for the 2 protectors to finish the battle and let the soldiers rest for a day before attacking the fourth stronghold, there won't be enough time. Therefore, we must rush over as fast as possible and attack the fourth stronghold." Hu Xinyue thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. She said, "This method is feasible. Our speed is fast enough and we can make use of the time difference. If we can destroy all the experts in the fourth stronghold, it will be easier for us to attack the Xuanji Grotto Heaven in the future." Ji Tianxing didn't waste any more time and immediately opened the Divine Bell World to let the Wanli Divine King and Ao Jinying rest. He brought Hu Xinyue into the central secret room and drove the Divine Bell to the fourth stronghold. The 20-hour journey that Ao Jinying spoke of was for him and the majority of the high-level Divine Kings. Ji Tianxing drove the primordial Chaos Bell, and his speed was unbelievably fast. He only used 6 hours to reach the stronghold. During this process, the left and right protectors indeed sent him a detailed battle report. Of course, the result of the battle was not out of his expectations. The army led by the left and right protectors had indeed achieved an impressive victory. They killed more than 2,200 enemy divine lords and 19 divine king experts. However, they also paid a heavy price. More than 600 divine lords died in battle and more than 1,300 divine lords were injured. 4 divine kings were killed and 6 divine kings were seriously injured. Even so, more than 2,000 enemy remnants were still able to escape to the vicinity of Sky Crane Mountain through the teleportation formation in the underground palace. At this moment, the army led by the 2 protectors was still cleaning up the battlefield and dealing with the aftermath. In the battle report that the two protectors presented to Ji Tianxing, they only reported the specific situation and didn't have any intention of asking for credit. Furthermore, the two of them were deeply remorseful that nearly half of the enemy had escaped. Ji Tianxing wasn't disappointed by this. He even encouraged the two protectors and asked them to calm down the soldiers and recuperate in peace. Soon, everyone would join forces to attack the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, and they would still need to work hard. After the two protectors received the reply, they naturally heaved a sigh of relief and were grateful to Ji Tianxing. Because they knew clearly in their hearts that their glorious battle results were simply not worth mentioning when compared to the two miracles that Ji Tianxing had created. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3766. Night fell and the world was dark. Perhaps even the heavens had sensed that the divine star zone was in a state of chaos. As a result, the vast night sky was as dark as ink, and there were barely any stars. Whoosh! A sesame-sized black dot passed through the dark night sky and arrived above a large canyon. On both sides of this 10,000 miles long valley were towering mountains, and in all directions, there were towering mountains and forests. Only a few people knew that this canyon was the fourth stronghold of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. In the past month, many god lords and god kings from the southeast of the Starsource continent had gathered here under the orders of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. They had set up a large number of palaces and mansions here, and set up powerful divine arrays. They were very secretive. In the past month, many experts from various forces had come and set up camp here. As a result, the stronghold's forces continued to grow. As of yesterday, there were already 5,000 god lords and 36 god kings gathered here. Among them, the 4 commanders in the lead were all high divine kings. It was no exaggeration to say that the strength of this stronghold ranked first among the 4 strongholds. It was the most powerful. Everyone was brimming with confidence and complacency. They were waiting for the Xuanji Grotto Heaven to give the order to attack the 10,000 Demon Alliance. However, 10 hours ago, an order from the Xuanji Grotto Heaven stunned the god kings and thousands of god lords in the stronghold. The sesame-sized black dot floated above the canyon. Looking down from the night sky, one could only see the deep canyon, the flowing river, and the mountains and forests on both sides. But in reality, Ji Tianxing could see through the heaven and earth divine formation with his divine eye secret art. On both sides of the canyon, there were more than 200 palaces and mansions. Around the canyon, there were many divine arrays and hidden sentries. There were still traces of chaotic divine power lingering in those palaces and residences. Of course, he knew that this was the 4th stronghold of the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. However, what caused his expression to turn icy cold and his brows to knit together tightly was that this stronghold was extremely quiet and desolate. He could not see the patrolling figures of the guards, nor could he hear the sounds from the stronghold, nor could he sense the powerful aura of a God King expert. Ji Tianxing secretly observed for a long time before he confirmed a fact. This stronghold was already empty. At least several thousand godly lords and dozens of godly kings had hurriedly left this base a few hours ago. As I expected, we're still a step too late. Ji Tianxing sighed regretfully in the central secret chamber of the god clock. Hu Xinyue, who was standing behind him, understood the result when she heard his words. Therefore, she comforted him with a calm tone. Young master, you don't have to be so demanding. The commander of the Enigma Grotto Heaven is not an idiot. Since the news of the 3 bases being destroyed has been leaked, they know what to do. You were able to create such a miracle and destroy 2 strongholds in 2 days without leaving a single survivor. This is already inconceivable and shocking. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and sneered with a playful tone. Since they have recalled the rest of the people to the Enigma Grotto Heaven, let's charge into the Enigma Grotto Heaven and fight to the death. Hu Xinyue frowned and quickly advised. Young master, are you going to the Enigma Grotto Heaven now? Aren't you in too much of a hurry? Not only have our soldiers not recovered from their injuries, but the soldiers led by the two protectors have also suffered heavy casualties. Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, I know all of this. Of course, I won't be so impatient. Even if I want to leave this place, I have to do one thing first. What is it? Hu Xinyue asked instinctively. Ji Tianqing smiled but did not answer. He just silently controlled the primordial chaos bell and expanded it billions of times. Swoosh! In the next moment, the god clock expanded to a radius of 10,000 miles. It was like a golden sun that smashed into the canyon below. Kaboom! With an earth-shattering sound like thunder, the invisible defensive divine formation was smashed to smithereens. Next, the 10,000-mile-long canyon was also smashed into ruins, turning into a desolate plain. The palaces and mansions on both sides of the canyon were naturally destroyed. However, the teleportation divine formation hidden deep underground still existed. Although it was heavily damaged, it could still be used. Therefore, Ji Tianqing found the teleportation divine formation underground and controlled the god clock to destroy it. A moment later, the base was completely destroyed and could no longer be used. Especially the teleportation divine formation. It was completely destroyed and could not be repaired at all. After doing this, Ji Tianqing left in satisfaction. Hu Xinyue finally understood his intention. Destroying this base was to prevent any accidents from happening when they attacked the Enigma Grotto heaven. After all, there was a teleportation divine formation in this base that connected this place to Sky Crane Mountain. If they did not destroy it, the people of the Enigma Grotto heaven could use this formation to their advantage. After leaving the fourth base, Ji Tianqing controlled the primordial chaos bell and disappeared into the night. He did not go to the Enigma Grotto heaven. Instead, he went to meet up with the two guardians. At the same time, Hu Xinyue had obtained Ji Tianqing's permission and could finally announce and spread the news of their glorious achievements. Hu Xinyue was very excited and worked together with Ao Jinying to spread the news. The next morning, when Ji Tianqing met up with the two guardians, a piece of shocking news had already spread across the Star Source continent. The Myriad Demon Alliance divided into two groups and arrived at the front line within 2 days. Within 2 days, they destroyed 4 bases of the Enigma Grotto heaven. The acting leader, Long Tian, personally destroyed 2 bases of the Enigma Grotto heaven in a flash. His methods were powerful and miraculous, rarely seen in the world. The 2 bases that were destroyed by Long Tian killed more than 10,000 divine emperors and more than 50 divine kings. None of them survived. Not only were the people in the 2 bases killed, but none of them managed to escape. Even the news could not be sent out. How powerful is the new expert of the Myriad Demon Alliance, Long Tian? How could he create such an unbelievable miracle? Similar news spread quickly across the Star Source continent. Countless divine king experts and forces knew about it. For a time, half of the Star Source continent was in shock. Countless people could not believe the news. Because of this, a shocking wave of discussion broke out. Long Tian's name spread across the Star Source continent overnight. He became an existence that countless experts and experts feared and revered. Of course, the reputation and morale of the Myriad Demon Alliance rose to the peak immediately. On the contrary, the reputation and prestige of the Enigma Grotto heaven fell rapidly within a day. It was extremely weak. Those top forces and divine king experts who had remained neutral and watched the tigers fight on the mountain started to think about a question while they were shocked. The Myriad Demon Alliance led by Long Tian had become a terrifying beast that could devour anyone. Would the leaderless Enigma Grotto heaven be able to withstand the attacks of the Myriad Demon Alliance? Would the Myriad Demon Alliance become the overlord of the Star Source continent soon? Chapter 3767. In the past few days, the news that had spread like wildfire across the Star Source continent was naturally released by the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Although the news did not exaggerate the truth, it was merely embellished on the basis of the truth. However, under the propaganda of the 10,000 Demon Alliance and many other forces, the news quickly spread across the entire continent and caused a huge uproar. The prestige and reputation of the 10,000 Demon Alliance reached the peak rapidly and shocked everyone. However, this was only secondary. What shocked the people the most was the miracle that Long Tian had created. This was also the main point that the 10,000 Demon Alliance emphasized when they released the news. Their goal was simple. They wanted Long Tian's name to spread across the continent and shock everyone. They wanted the people and forces of the entire Starsource continent to know that Long Tian was a peak supreme being comparable to the Luo Ho Alliance Master and the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. He was a super expert who was brave and smart. Moreover, he was someone who could destroy the Xuanji Grotto. As such, in just a few days, Long Tian became a peak supreme being that everyone knew. He was a super expert who was feared and respected. A few months ago, he had traveled north and killed many region masters and supreme beings. He had also made a name for himself in the various regions in the northwest. However, that was just a small matter. His name was only in the 30 regions in the northwest. However, it was different now. The 10,000 Demon Alliance had helped him spread his name across the entire Starsource continent. He had become an expert comparable to the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor and the Luo Ho Supreme Being. He could be ranked in the top 3 in the entire continent. As for the 10,000 Demon Alliance helping him spread his name, he only laughed it off and did not take it to heart. This was done by Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying without his permission. However, to him, this was not a bad thing. Therefore, he did not interfere in this matter and allowed Ao Jinying and Hu Xinyue to do what they wanted. In these few days, he met up with the 2 guardians and explained the next plan and goal. Then, he allowed the soldiers to rest and recuperate. In fact, since things had developed to this stage, the next goal was very simple. The 4 strongholds of the Xuanji Grotto had been destroyed, and the remaining 5,000 Ser-Gods had retreated to the Xuanji Grotto. Next, as long as the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance recovered from their wounds and adjusted themselves, they would be able to march toward the Xuanji Paradise. Everything they had done before, including the 10,000 Demon Alliance's promotion of the victory and the demoralization of the Mystic Paradise, was to prepare for the upcoming final battle. No matter what the outcome of the battle was, the final battle would determine the outcome. The godly kings and godly lords under the left and right protectors suffered even more casualties. Even after 4 days of recuperation, there was no obvious relief. This was a normal situation. When a divine monarch or divine king was injured, they would need several years or even decades to recover. There was no point in being anxious. Thus, Ji Tianxing sent the left and right protectors into the divine clock world, as well as the 3,000 soldiers under their command, into the divine clock world to recuperate. Other than the 2 groups of soldiers led by him and the 2 guardians, another group of soldiers under the command of the 10,000 Clouds Alliance had been waiting for orders. Ji Tianxing waited at the border of the Divine Star Zone for 3 days to gather the soldiers. 3 days later, in the middle of the night, when the 3rd group of soldiers arrived, the number of soldiers under Ji Tianxing's command had finally reached 10,000 people. This group of soldiers was handed over to Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying. Although these 5,000 soldiers did not participate in the battle, they had been conserving their strength. Ji Tianxing still asked Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying to take them into the divine clock world to wait for orders. Then, Ji Tianxing drove the primordial chaos bell alone, left the border of the divine star zone, and rushed toward Sky Crane Mountain in the center of the divine star zone. On the surface, he looked like he was alone. But in reality, there were more than 10,000 godly lords and dozens of godly kings hidden in his divine clock world. In addition, there were a few godly kings in his Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda, who were also powerful helpers. On the morning of the fourth day, Ji Tianxing arrived near Sky Crane Mountain. He stayed in the central secret chamber of the primordial chaos bell and did not show himself. He secretly observed the situation of Sky Crane Mountain. The primordial chaos bell shrunk into a speck of dust and hid its tracks. It floated in the sea of clouds and no one could detect it. Ji Tianxing sat in the divine clock and looked at the white sea of clouds in all directions. Not far ahead, there was a towering mountain. That huge mountain with a radius of 100 miles stood in the sea of clouds. It looked majestic and mighty, simple and ancient. In the sky above the hurricane there was a huge white light vortex. It was like a bright moon hanging high in the sky. That mountain peak was Sky Crane Mountain. And that huge white light vortex was the entrance to the Xuanji Grotto heaven. Ji Tianxing drove the primordial chaos bell and silently flew over the sea of clouds. He hid at the peak of Sky Crane Mountain and merged with the ground of the mountain. He could clearly see that there were more than 1,000 godly lords and dozens of godly kings stationed at the peak of Sky Crane Mountain. He could clearly see the clothes, looks, and expressions of those people. But both sides were less than 100 miles apart. Those powerhouses could not discover the primordial chaos bell. Ji Tianxing was not in a hurry to take action. Firstly, the 5,000 soldiers in the divine clock world had yet to recover. Secondly, he had to observe the defenses of Sky Crane Mountain first and understand the situation of the Xuanji Grotto heaven. Under a situation where he did not understand the situation and rashly attacked the Xuanji Grotto heaven, it was very likely that he would suffer a huge loss. Facts proved that Ji Tianxing's carefulness and caution were indeed effective. He hid at the peak of Sky Crane Mountain for 3 days and 3 nights, observing the activity at the peak the entire time. In these 3 days, the guards and godly kings stationed at the peak of Sky Crane Mountain did not change much. But there were many godly kings entering and exiting that white light vortex every day, entering and exiting the Xuanji Grotto heaven. This proved that the Xuanji Grotto heaven was not scared out of their wits by his glorious battle results and scared until they shut down the Xuanji Grotto heaven. Since the Xuanji Grotto heaven's entrance was still open, those godly kings who frequently entered and exited must be carrying out some mission. Of course, only a very small number of godly kings entered and exited. Clearly, they were carrying out orders and passing information. Most of the godly kings did not appear after entering the Xuanji Grotto heaven. Ji Tianxing did not need to guess to know that they must be the godly kings under the Xuanji Grotto heaven's command, rushing over to protect their master after receiving the Xuanji Grotto heaven's edict. He roughly estimated that there were more than 30 godly kings who rushed over to help and entered the Xuanji Grotto heaven in these 3 days. In addition to the previous stronghold and the godly kings already in the Xuanji Grotto heaven, there were more than 200 godly kings. As for the Myriad Demon Alliance, there were less than 100 godly kings at the very most, just over 60. Regarding this, Ji Tianxing felt deeply helpless. The Xuanji Grotto heaven is indeed the overlord of the Star Source continent. Even if the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor is not here, they can still gather 200 godly kings to help. The number of godly kings in the entire continent is only slightly over 1,000, and the Xuanji Grotto heaven can actually gather 20% of them. One can imagine that if the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was here, even gathering 300 to 500 godly kings would not be a problem. Under such circumstances, who would dare to go against the Xuanji Grotto heaven? Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3768. Xuanji Grotto heaven had gathered close to 200 godly kings in the Grotto heaven, waiting for the final battle. Once the Myriad Demon League's soldiers entered, they would definitely be ambushed from all sides. Xuanji Grotto heaven had 3 times as many godly kings as the Myriad Demon League, and more godly emperors. At that time, Xuanji Grotto heaven, who had the advantage in numbers, would most likely win and kill the Myriad Demon League's soldiers. Ji Tianxing was deeply worried about this. However, he did not feel despair, and he would not give up on attacking. After all, the Myriad Demon League had an advantage, and that was that they had peak Godly King experts, but Xuanji Grotto Heaven did not. Ji Tianqing believed that as long as he handled it well, he could still destroy Xuanji Grotto Heaven. After observing for 3 days and 3 nights, Ji Tianqing had a rough understanding of Xuanji Grotto Heaven's situation. He decided to attack. Therefore, he sent a message to the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the others. His voice rang out in the divine bell world, and the tens of thousands of soldiers heard it clearly. Instantly, the tens of thousands of soldiers who were in the middle of healing or meditating all woke up. Everyone ended their cultivation and recuperation. They put on their armor and took out their divine weapons, preparing for the upcoming battle. Everyone's body was quickly accumulating divine power and emitting a strong fighting spirit. At the same time, Ji Tianqing controlled the primordial chaos bell and flew silently toward the white light vortex in the sky. At that moment 2 intermediate godly kings flew over from the sea of clouds in the distance, heading straight for the white light vortex. Looking at the dusty appearance of the 2 godly kings, it was obvious that they had come from a remote area to help Xuanji Grotto Heaven fight against the Myriad Demon League. Ji Tianqing chose to enter Xuanji Grotto Heaven at this moment because of the arrival of the 2 intermediate godly kings. That's right. He wanted to use the 2 intermediate godly kings to sneak into Xuanji Grotto Heaven. This was something that he had planned for a long time. At the same time, Hu Xinyue, Ao Jinying, and the others, as well as Xuanji Grotto Heaven, did not expect this. Everyone thought that with his army of 10,000, he would definitely attack the Xuanji Grotto with a murderous aura. At that time, he would display the strength of a peak divine king and forcefully break through the entrance of the Xuanji Grotto. He would then charge in domineeringly. Meanwhile, the Xuanji Wonderland had long prepared for it. They would surely make him suffer a great loss. Unfortunately, Ji Tianqing would never do that. That was the stupidest and most dangerous thing to do. Swoosh. Swish. In the blink of an eye, the 2 mid-level divine kings, who were wearing beast skin capes and armor, arrived near the white light vortex. The 2 of them stopped and scanned the area. When they saw the divine lord guards on the mountain peak, they could not help but exclaim in amazement. As expected of the Xuanji Grotto, the security is so tight. Not only are there over 1,000 divine lord guards, there are also over a dozen divine kings standing guard here. Just as the 2 of them were sighing in their hearts, 2 high-level god kings walked out of the 6 god kings guarding the entrance to the cave and came forward to interrogate them. "Sir, where are you from? What business do you have in the Xuanji Grotto?" The 2 high-level god kings in golden armor had their hands on the hilts of the sabers at their waists as they looked at the 2 visitors with dignified gazes. Ji Tianqing was not unfamiliar with these 2 high-level god kings guarding the entrance to the grotto. One of them was an 8th-degree divine king, one of the divine generals of the Xuanji Grotto. Back then, when Ji Tianqing first came to the Xuanji Grotto, the divine general was one of the people who had injured him besides the heartless divine king. However, now that Ji Tianqing saw him again, he did not have the intention to take revenge. He controlled the primordial chaos bell and took advantage of the time when the 2 of them were conversing to approach silently. "Sir Divine General, we are the domain lords of the moon-slaying, fallen maple region. We have come on the orders of the Xuanji Grotto." The 2 mid-level divine kings bowed respectfully and introduced themselves to the divine general guarding the entrance, as well as the purpose of their visit. The divine general's dignified expression immediately softened. He nodded slightly and said, "Please show me your identity tokens and the orders issued by the general." After he finished speaking, he saw that the 2 middle-level god kings were stunned for a moment before he explained, "Please cooperate with me, domain lords. The situation has been tense recently. I am just doing my job for the safety of the Xuanji Grotto. I hope you can understand." although the Xuanji Grotto maintained its usual confidence and confidence. Even when the Myriad Demon Alliance's army was about to arrive, the Xuanji Grotto did not close. However, the number of soldiers guarding the grotto's entrance had obviously increased by several times compared to before. Those who entered and exited the grotto had to undergo strict inspection and interrogation. This was to prevent the Myriad Demon Alliance from sneaking into the Xuanji Grotto during the chaos. The two domain lords understood this point and quickly nodded. "Don't worry, Sir Divine General. Of course we understand and cooperate." As they spoke, the two domain lords quickly took out their identity tokens and the special jade slips that the Xuanji Grotto used to issue orders and handed them to the Divine General guarding the entrance for inspection. The Divine General guarding the entrance and the upper-level God King did not dare to be careless. They really took the tokens and jade slips and carefully checked and compared them. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing steered the primordial chaos bell and silently flew behind one of the domain lords, sticking it to his beast skin cloak. In any case, the two domain lords looked tired and travel-worn. Their cloaks and robes were already covered in dust. Even if there was a speck of black dust, no one would notice. Moreover, this speck of black dust was invisible. It did not have any energy waves. After a while, the Divine General guarding the entrance confirmed the identities of the two domain lords. Only then did he return the tokens and jade slips to them. He reminded them, "Domain lords, your identities have been verified. You may enter the Xuanji Grotto and report to the Grand Marshal. Please remember, after entering the Xuanji Grotto, do not wander around. There will be people inside to receive you and bring you to the Grand Marshal or Commander Qin." The two domain lords came from remote areas. This was the second time in their lives that they had come to the Xuanji Grotto. Naturally, they were very cautious. The two did not dare to be careless about the Divine General's warning. After listening carefully, they nodded and made a statement. Next, the Divine General waved his hand and cast a spell to open the entrance to the grotto. Whoosh! A door opened in the white vortex that led to the Xuanji Grotto. The two domain masters tidied up their clothes and appearances before flying into the white light vortex at a moderate pace. Whoosh! The blinding white light swallowed the two figures. In the next moment, the two domain lords entered the Xuanji Grotto and appeared on an ancient divine rock that was tens of thousands of feet wide. This divine rock was like a millstone. Its surface was flat and filled with mysterious runes. Around the rock were hundreds of godly lords guarding it. There were also 12 godly kings in a formation, ready to deal with any unexpected situations. Seeing this scene, the two domain leaders felt even more reverence and acted even more cautiously. Chapter 3769. The Divine General did not lie to the two domain lords. There were indeed a few envoys waiting around the rock. One of the envoys came forward and asked about the two domain lords' identities before bringing them to meet the War Dragon King. During this process, the primordial chaos bell controlled by Ji Tianxing stuck to one of the Realm Master's cloaks in the form of transparent dust. There were hundreds of godly lords and 12 godly kings guarding the rock. The 12 godly kings were all upper godly kings. Therefore, he did not dare to act rashly to avoid exposing himself. When the two domain lords left the divine stone disk under the guidance of the emissary, he was still observing the situation around the divine stone. Seeing the countless invisible divine formations and the traps around the rock, he frowned, his eyes flashing coldly. "Kakik! The War Dragon King and Qin, you are truly despicable. They actually buried so many traps and formations around the entrance. Once I lead the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers and break through the entrance to the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. When we step into the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, we will fall into layers of traps and divine formations. At that time, only the upper godly kings will be able to survive. Most of the soldiers will be killed. No wonder the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven, and the War Dragon King and Qin you were severely injured. Unfortunately, I will have to disappoint you this time. How can I lead the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers into the Xuanji Grotto heaven? Fortunately, Ji Tianxing had already planned and prepared. If it were anyone else, the 10,000 Demon Alliance would definitely be in dire straits. At this thought, Ji Tianxing felt both fear and relief. The Xuanji Grotto heaven was huge. In Ji Tianxing's impression, it was the largest and most resource-rich grotto heaven on the Star Source continent. The entire grotto heaven was more than 3 million miles wide and could accommodate billions of living beings. It was a small world. In this grotto heaven, there were green mountains and clear waters, icy lakes and snowy plains, as well as deserts and mountains. The divine power of heaven and earth was extremely rich. With a sweep of his divine sense, he could find the resources he needed for cultivation. Occasionally, he would even come across rare treasures of heaven and earth. Ji Tianxing knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor had taken over the mystical paradise because of its size and abundance of resources. At the same time, the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor had also modified and nurtured the Xuanji Grotto over the past 20,000 years. Most of the cultivation resources he had plundered from all over the continent were scattered in the Enigma Grotto. As a result, many resources could be regenerated and multiplied, making the mysterious grotto's resources even more abundant. Just like how Ji Tianxing cultivated the Five Elements world, he would invest hundreds of billions of cultivation resources every once in a while to transform the Five Elements world. Over time, those incomparably precious cultivation resources caused the spirit chi of the Five Elements world to be extremely abundant. Then, even more resources were born, and it became a paradise for cultivators. Swoosh! Swish! The two region masters followed the emissary and flew high up in the sky for an hour before they arrived at the Golden Dragon Mountain in the middle of the grotto heaven. The 100,000-mile-long Golden Dragon Mountain was pieced together by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor after moving thousands of mountain peaks. It was a man-made divine range of heaven and earth that gathered the divine power of the entire mysterious grotto. It was a first-class cultivation paradise. The Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's cave abode and divine palace were built on the Golden Dragon Mountain. At this moment, the hundreds of palaces and mansions in the Golden Dragon Mountain were filled with people. Some of them were the natives of the mysterious grotto, while others were the famous Golden Dragon Guards. Most of them were the region masters and god kings from all over the continent, as well as the soldiers they led. The Golden Dragon Mountain was now a gathering of true experts. The two region masters were about to meet the War Dragon King. Ji Tianxing was worried that the other party would notice something was amiss, so he alighted in advance. When they arrived at the Golden Dragon Mountain, he stealthily left the region master's cape with the primordial chaos bell. Hence, the two region masters followed the emissary to meet the War Dragon King. Ji Tianxing steered the primordial chaos bell and stealthily entered the Golden Dragon Mountain. He roamed around and gathered information. The Golden Dragon Mountain was too big. It spanned 100,000 miles. Fortunately, the palaces and mansions were not scattered throughout the entire mountain range. Instead, they were concentrated at the highest point of the mountain range. Even so, the 800-plus palaces and residences that were scattered all over the place still occupied an area of 20,000 miles in circumference. This was a good thing for Ji Tianxing. At least it would be easier for him to gather information. Originally, he only needed to release his divine consciousness to cover an area of 20,000 miles and see everything clearly. However, there were tens of thousands of godly lords and hundreds of god kings gathered in this area. If he released his divine consciousness openly, he would quickly expose his whereabouts and alert the other party. More importantly, he was still uncertain about one thing. It was extremely important and could even affect the outcome of the war. That was the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor in the mysterious grotto? The Myriad Demon Alliance had been investigating this matter, and confirmed that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not there. Ji Tianxing also knew that the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's true body would not return so quickly. However, if he did not investigate this matter personally, he would not be at ease. Therefore, Ji Tianxing used the primordial chaos bell as a cover to investigate the palaces and mansions. At the same time, he was also searching for the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's aura. In other words, he was searching for the aura of a peak god king. As long as there was no peak god king in the mysterious grotto, he was confident that he could destroy it. However, if there was a peak god king in the mysterious grotto, regardless of whether the other party was the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor or not, his confidence would be greatly reduced. There was no sun in the mysterious grotto. Naturally, there was no day and night. 9 divine pearls floated high in the sky. They continuously released divine light and illuminated millions of miles. The palaces and mansions in the Golden Dragon Mountain were always bathed in the glorious divine light. Tens of thousands of godly lords were obediently waiting in the palaces and mansions. They were circulating their energy and conserving their energy as they waited for orders. Close to 200 God King experts were also meditating and adjusting their breathing quietly. They were guarding their respective officers and soldiers, carrying out their respective orders. Although tens of thousands of experts were gathered in the Golden Dragon Mountain, it was extremely quiet and not noisy at all. Only the Golden Dragon Guards were constantly patrolling and monitoring the surroundings for abnormalities. In such a tense and gloomy atmosphere, Ji Tianxing was like a formless spirit. He wandered around the palaces and mansions without restraint. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. No one discovered anything unusual or his presence. At the same time, he secretly searched over 800 palaces and mansions. He had a clear understanding of the trump cards of the mysterious grotto. There were 23,460 god monarchs and 212 god king experts gathered here. However, there was no peak god king aura or Golden Origin Dragon Emperor. The general of the mysterious grotto was the severely injured and weak war dragon king. Next was the governor of the Golden Dragon Guards, Qin Yu. This result made Ji Tianxing feel at ease. After pondering for a long time, he decided to take action. Today, the battle would begin. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3770. Although Ji Tianxing controlled the primordial chaos bell and hid in the headquarters of Xuanji Grotto Heaven, there were palaces and residences all around. Within a radius of 20,000 miles, there were over 20,000 Sir Gods and over 200 God Kings gathered. If he directly summoned over 10,000 soldiers to attack the palaces and residences, it would definitely cause a huge commotion. The soldiers under the command of Xuanji Grotto Heaven would definitely be scared out of their wits and be dumbfounded. But that was all. Other than scaring the enemy, it might not cause any substantial damage, let alone establish the foundation for victory. After all, the 20,000 over Sir Gods and God Kings gathered here were all well rested and unharmed. Even if they were shocked for a moment, they would panic. But under the command of many God Kings, they would be able to react in an instant. Then, they would surround the Thousand Demon Alliance's soldiers and gradually force their way in, killing all the Thousand Demon Alliance's soldiers. So what Ji Tianxing wanted to do was to plunge the headquarters of Xuanji Grotto Heaven into chaos. He also wanted to create huge casualties and panic for these Sir Gods and God Kings who were in full condition and had normal combat strength. It would be best if he could execute a decapitation operation and kill a few leaders and such figures. That would be even better. After thinking of a plan, Ji Tianxing started to look for targets. Ji Tianxing's first target was called Qinfeng Courtyard. This courtyard occupied an area of 10,000 feet and was built on the ridge of the Golden Dragon Mountain. Compared to the other residences and palaces, the terrain here was lower and was at the edge. Very obviously, this courtyard was not too important. The people who lived here in the past were just soldiers of the Golden Dragon Guard. Currently, there were over 100 Sir Gods and one God King powerhouse living in the courtyard. These people came from a region in the south of the Starsource continent. The 4th degree Realm God King was the Deputy Region Master. Very obviously, the Region Master of this region was more cunning. He did not want to offend Xuanji Grotto Heaven, so he could only send people to help. But he said that he had something important to do and could not leave, so he sent the Deputy Region Master to bring over 100 Sir Gods to help. This bit of help was not enough to get the attention of Xuanji Grotto Heaven. Therefore, after these people entered the Xuanji Grotto, they were placed in the outermost courtyard. These people had already been recuperating here for half a month. During this time, they did nothing but meditate in their rooms all day long. They were just waiting for the day when the Grand Marshal's order was passed down. Then, everyone would go into battle. In this half a month, other than the first day when an envoy led them here and settled them in the Cool Breeze courtyard, no one else came. The Deputy Region Master and the hundreds of Sir Gods felt like they had been abandoned and ignored. They were very angry. If it were not for the Deputy Region Master's strong efforts to suppress and persuade them, the hundreds of Sir Gods would have become deserters. Of course, this was just a thought. Now that they had entered the Enigma Grotto, they had no choice but to leave. They couldn't even run away. At that moment, more than 100 Sir Gods were still meditating in various rooms. The Deputy Region Master was in a secret chamber deep underground, cultivating peacefully. Inside the gloomy secret room, there was a faint divine light that was filled with a dense divine aura. Suddenly, a slight spatial fluctuation came from the corner of the secret room. Under normal circumstances, the Deputy Region Master might have sensed it. But at that moment, he was cultivating and in the Enigma Grotto, so he was very relaxed and did not have any vigilance. Therefore, he did not notice the unusual spatial fluctuation, nor did he know that there was an extra person in the secret room. Without a sound, a handsome figure appeared from a dark corner and floated behind the Deputy Region Master. This young man from the Dragon Clan in a white robe had a handsome face and sharp eyebrows. His eyes were as vast as the sea of stars. Even if he did not show any divine aura, he gave people a sense of unfathomable majesty and dominance. The 5 senses and 6 senses of a divine king were far superior to that of an ordinary divine spirit. The Deputy Region Master finally became alert and realized that something was wrong. He forced himself to stop cultivating and was about to shout. However, a broad and powerful palm suddenly covered his head. A silent but powerful force passed through the top of his head and blasted into his mind. Kaboom! In the Deputy Region Master's mind, there was a thunderous explosion. His consciousness instantly fell into darkness and he lost consciousness. Although he was still sitting cross-legged in the middle of the secret room, he did not look any different, not even a scar. But in fact, his mind had been destroyed, and his godhead was shattered. He was already dead. The young man in the white robe killed the Deputy Region Master in seconds. His figure became transparent, blurred, and soon disappeared. A moment later, he left the breeze yard and sneaked into another house nearby. From beginning to end, there was no unusual sound or aura in the breeze yard. Naturally, no one noticed anything unusual. Next to the breeze yard, there was another house of similar size called. The name was not important. Anyway, there was a divine king and more than 70 divine emperors living in this house. They were also a group of marginal people. Although they were not the region masters of a region, they were the elites of a first-class force in the south. In the area they were in, they were lofty and honorable figures. Wherever they went, they would be surrounded by attendants, and they were extremely honorable. But unfortunately, after coming to the Xuanji Cave Heaven, they could only sit on the bench. In the past 20 days, they had seen too many experts and superiors and deeply felt their insignificance. Therefore, these people were full of energy. In the upcoming war, they wanted to kill the enemy courageously, make contributions, and win the favor of the Xuanji Cave Heaven. However, it was a pity that Ji Tianxing had shown the leader of the sect master what it meant by dying before achieving victory in battle. The sect master was in the secret room thinking about how to stand out in the war and let the Grand Marshal know him. Suddenly, a white figure appeared out of thin air in the study room. The sect master just realized that something was wrong. He was instantly alert and turned his head to look behind him. Unfortunately, he only saw a pair of calm, cold, and deep eyes and a jade-like hand. Then he lost consciousness and fell into a deep sleep forever. Even at the moment of his death, the sect master still didn't know who had killed him. He was even more confused as to who would dare to assassinate him in the Xuanji Wonderland. It did not make sense. He was just an insignificant person. He would not compete with anyone for credit, nor would he block anyone's path to promotion and wealth. How could he be so underhanded? With so many questions and puzzlement, the sect master passed away. The dozens of divine emperors under his command were still in various rooms in the house, actively preparing for war, cultivating, and working hard. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 3771. For an entire day, 24 hours, Ji Tianxing was busy. His invisible figure traveled through the Golden Dragon mountain range, quietly entering and exiting the various residences and palaces. Although the hundreds of palaces and residences were filled with people. But inside the majority of the houses, there were only Divine Lord Realm experts and no Divine King Realm powerhouses. Therefore, Ji Tianxing ignored the residences and palaces that only had Divine Lords and specifically targeted the residences with Divine Kings. He was only one person. If he wanted to greatly weaken the mystical grotto's combat power in the shortest amount of time, this was the only way. Assassinate as many divine kings as possible. Not only would this reduce the number of divine kings, it would also cause many divine lords to temporarily lose their commander and leader. After all, these divine lords came from all over the world. They came from various domains of the Star Source continent and belonged to different factions. Even if they were nominally subordinates of the mystical grotto, they would not directly listen to the orders of the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu. They needed their leader to relay the orders. Ji Tianxing assassinated their leader. For a short period of time, no one would notice anything amiss. Once the battle began and the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu gave the order to attack, they would discover that the order could not be transmitted smoothly. At that time, the 20,000 divine lords in the sky of the mystical grotto would fall into chaos. The result could be imagined. Within a day, Ji Tianxing assassinated more than 80 divine kings. Among these divine kings, most were middle divine kings. Only a few were lower divine kings and upper divine kings. These divine kings were not from the mystical grotto's headquarters. They were basically the domain lords of various domains, the elites of various peak factions. The number of divine lord experts they led was more than 15,000. In addition, it was worth mentioning that these 80 divine kings were not very strong, but Ji Tianxing did not mind. Every time he killed a divine king, he would plunder their divine spark fragments and interspatial rings. In this way, after a busy day, his harvest was terrifying. Of course, now was not the time to count the spoils of war. This had to be left for later. Currently, there were already a dozen divine lords in their residences who realized that they had lost contact with their leaders. Some of the more impatient divine lords violently broke open the doors to secret rooms and study rooms. Then, they discovered that their leader had died in a very strange and bizarre manner. He had died silently. Instantly, those Sir Gods fell into a great panic and were out of their wits. Many people were guessing who had killed their leader. Most importantly, this was the headquarters of the Enigma Grotto, a place where experts gathered. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it was the safest place on the Star Source continent. Who was it that quietly killed their leader? For a time, countless divine lords were in a state of panic. Everyone had different opinions. Some of the more imaginative ones even guessed that an expert from the Xuanji Grotto had killed their commander. As for the reason, he didn't know. There was no reason. In any case, this was the mysterious paradise. Other than experts like the Battle Dragon King, Qin Yu, and the Divine General guarding the entrance, who could assassinate the other Divine Kings silently. Thankfully, there were many Divine Lords who were able to maintain their rationality. Realizing that the situation was not good, they quickly went to find the emissaries and reported the news to them, hoping that the experts of the Xuanji Grotto would be able to investigate the matter. Even if the Battle Dragon King and Qin Yu's statuses were too high, they would not be alarmed by this matter. Sending a few Golden Dragon Guard commanders to deal with this matter was only natural. After all, the news had already spread. Not only did the Ser Gods in the palaces and mansions fall into panic and chaos. The news spread in all directions and quickly alerted even more mansions and palaces. As a result, in a short 4 hours, 50 to 60 forces discovered that their leader had been assassinated. Without a doubt, the matter had completely blown up and exploded. Dozens of palaces and mansions fell into chaos. The Ser Gods were restless and discussed in panic. The news could not be covered up and quickly spread throughout the entire Golden Dragon mountain range. Even the unscathed God Kings were frightened out of their wits. They were filled with fear and unease. In such a situation, many experts and Ser Gods were suspicious and wary of each other. Who would have the mind to prepare for war? Of course, now that the matter had been exposed, everyone became vigilant and uneasy. Ji Tianqing naturally could not make a move. He temporarily hid in the Primal Chaos Primordial Bell and monitored the highest palace on the mountain peak. The Battle Dragon King, Qin Yu, and the generals of the mysterious grotto were frequently entering and exiting the palace. Obviously, the Battle Dragon King, Qin Yu, and the others had also received the news. As long as one was not a fool, they would understand how serious this matter was. Soon, Qin Yu personally led 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders and hurried to the palace where the incident happened. Seeing Qin Yu appear, Ji Tianqing's eyes suddenly lit up and became interested. This guy fell into the void back then and was still alive. He is considered lucky. Now that his injuries have not healed, his strength is still very weak. If I can kill this guy before the war, it will save me a lot of trouble. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianqing controlled the Primal Chaos Primordial Bell and quietly followed behind Qin Yu and the others. After a while, Qin Yu and the 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders arrived at the palace where the incident happened. The 3 experts looked around and saw dozens of palaces around them. They were all in a hubbub of voices and were in a state of panic. There were even thousands of divine lords who demanded an explanation from the Xuanji Grotto heaven out of anger. If they could not come up with a reasonable explanation, they would not be able to accept the bizarre death of their leader, let alone fight for the mysterious grotto. At this moment, who those divine lord experts were loyal to was clear as day. Seeing the crowd clamoring incessantly, the Golden Dragon Guards who rushed over after hearing the news suppressed those divine lords with their foreheads covered in sweat. Qin Yu was so angry that his face was livid, his entire body trembling in anger. He really wanted to throw a tantrum, destroy the heaven and earth, and then ask loudly, who the fuck did this? But very unfortunately, as the deputy commander of the mysterious grotto, he absolutely could not do so. He could only be patient, suppress his anger, and carefully examine the scene of the crime, looking for clues. Qin Yu was indeed worthy of being a peak 8th level Divine King expert. His vision was like a torch, and he was rich in experience. He only used 100 breaths of time to finish investigating a palace and gave a conclusion. To be able to assassinate a middle-level Divine King silently without alerting anyone, without leaving any clues, and without any wounds, this is definitely done by an 8th level or 9th level Divine King expert. The 2 Golden Dragon Guard commanders nodded repeatedly to express their agreement. But the courtyard full of Divine Lord experts had cold and indifferent expressions. There were even some extremely daring and angry true lovers who even shouted at the top of their lungs. Do we still need you to investigate? We already guessed it long ago. Isn't this obvious? Chapter 3772. Qin Yu almost exploded in anger. As the Honorable Golden Dragon Guard Governor, he was actually ridiculed by a mere Divine Lord in public. How infuriating was this? If it was a normal day, he would have slapped that person into pieces. But at this moment, he couldn't do that. Under the watchful eyes of so many people, he had to endure. He took a deep breath and pretended that he didn't hear that sentence. He said to the two Golden Dragon Guard commanders, "There are too many places where the incident happened. Let's split up and check the scene as soon as possible." The two Golden Dragon Guard commanders obeyed and hurriedly left to check the other palaces and houses. Although Qin Yu knew that this matter was very strange and made him and Battle Dragon King extremely shocked. Even if he investigated carefully, he wouldn't be able to find any result. But he had to do it in front of the 10,000 Divine Lords. At that time, he still had to discuss countermeasures with Battle Dragon King and think of a way to end this matter. He had to appease these 10,000 Divine Lords. Otherwise, the future war would be worrying. Swish! Qin Yu frowned with a gloomy face. While thinking about this matter, he flew to another palace. The courtyard was filled with Divine Monarch experts. Looking at Qin Yu's departing figure, they all revealed dissatisfied expressions and eyes. But due to Qin Yu's prestige, no one said anything. No one dared to follow him and ask. This made things convenient for Ji Tianqing. He quietly followed Qin Yu. When Qin Yu flew to the space between the two palaces, above a lush forest, he finally made his move. Swish! Suddenly, without any warning, a black shadow descended from the originally calm sky. Qin Yu was still thinking about something and was frowning in distress. He wasn't on guard at all. He was flying in the sky. Why did everything turn black and fall into a dark world? Who? Which bastard? Qin Yu subconsciously took out his divine saber. As he cursed, he slashed at the dark walls around him. However, when the dazzling saber light slashed at those dark barriers, there was a muffled bang 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 sound, but there was no effect. He suddenly understood something and turned pale with fright, his eyes glaring angrily. I understand now. It's you bastard who assassinated so many divine kings. Qin Yu, who was in the dark space with a radius of 10,000 li, roared with murderous intent. However, even after searching the entire dark space, he still couldn't find the culprit. Only a low male voice came from above his head. You're not that stupid. You finally understand. This voice was somewhat unfamiliar. Qin Yu frowned as he pondered, whose voice was this? Unfortunately, he didn't know the answer, so he shouted coldly, Who are you? Why did he betray the Xuanji Grotto? Do you know what kind of sin this is? I will definitely report this to His Majesty Dragon Emperor. No matter who you are or what your background is, you will suffer His Majesty Dragon Emperor's wrath. In the darkness, the voice sounded again, and the tone was rather mocking. Haha, don't use the Dragon Emperor to scare me. He's not in the Xuanji Grotto. Moreover, you're about to die and you don't know my identity. Who can report to the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor? You! Qin Yu's anger surged wildly, his killing intent overflowing to the heavens. Through these few sentences, he was even more certain that this person was from the Xuanji Utopia. However, he really couldn't figure out who this person was, who had such strength, reason, and motive to betray the Xuanji Utopia like this. Thinking of this, Qin Yu decided to continue probing. He said coldly, Bastard, even if you hide, I won't be able to see through your identity. However, you've attacked here, and there are restless divine lords nearby, as well as my golden dragon guards. Now, they must have noticed something amiss and will quickly report to the Grand Marshal. The voice sounded again in the darkness, and it said with a sneer, "Since I've attacked, how can I expose myself so easily? There's such a huge dark world inside this divine artifact." However, in reality, the divine artifact has shrunk to the size of a speck of dust and is hiding in the ground. Those divine lords and golden dragon guards only know that you suddenly disappeared, but they don't know what happened. By the time the War Dragon King finds out about this, your ashes will already be cold. Hearing these words, Qin Yu was naturally filled with anger. However, after confirming that the traitor wasn't the War Dragon King, he heaved a sigh of relief. He still wanted to say something, but the voice didn't speak again. Then, an invisible divine aura descended from all directions, and a majestic power that could suppress heaven and earth crushed Qin Yu. Even though Qin Yu was prepared and powerful, he was still injured by the terrifying pressure, and he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. His divine power instantly became chaotic, and his combat power dropped drastically. His movements were also greatly restricted. Even though he was in danger, he didn't panic. He hurriedly used his energy to resist the divine aura, and he held his saber vigilantly, in case the other party suddenly attacked. However, Qin Yu still underestimated the other party's strength and methods. Whoosh! In the darkness, a dazzling golden sword light suddenly appeared, and it carried the sword essence of the heavenly sword and attacked. Feeling the familiar sword essence and divine power aura, Qin Yu's expression changed drastically, and his eyes widened like copper bells. "It's you! How is it possible, Long Tian? How can it be you?" Without a doubt, Qin Yu recognized the true identity of the traitor. It was Long Tian. However, he couldn't believe it, and he couldn't accept this result. Didn't Long Tian lead the Myriad Demon Alliance's army and approach Xuanji Grotto Heaven? How could he sneak into Xuanji Grotto Heaven and assassinate so many divine kings? Damn bastard, how did he do it? At this moment, many thoughts flashed through Qin Yu's mind. However, he didn't care about the truth, and could only wave his saber with all his might to block that dazzling sword light. Kaboom! In the next instant, the sacred golden sword light struck Qin Yu, shattering the saber light he used, and sent him flying. Pfff, while he was still in midair, Qin Yu was already vomiting blood wildly, and his internal organs were shattered. Even if he was at his peak, he was not Ji Tianxing's match, let alone now that his old injuries had not healed. Before he could land on the ground, thousands of dazzling sword auras suddenly attacked him from all directions in the darkness. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Thousands of sword lights crisscrossed, as fast as lightning, like a sword net and also like a hurricane. Qin Yu was in the middle, resisting with incomparable difficulty. Very soon, he was minced until his flesh was dripping with blood, and he was riddled with wounds. If it was a great battle in the outside world, he would definitely be able to execute all kinds of divine abilities and ultimate skills, and utilize all kinds of divine Tao laws. This battle would also definitely startle heaven and earth, destroying the commotion within a radius of 100,000 miles. However, very unfortunately, he fell into a trap from the start and lost the initiative. Being suppressed inside the Chaos Primordial Bell, even if he had tremendous ability and methods, he could not unleash 30% of it. His defeat was already destined. End of this chapter. Chapter 3773. Ji Tianxing and Qin Yu fought inside the Primordial Chaos Bell for half an hour. In the end, Qin Yu ended up dead and his Tao dissipated. His body was destroyed, turned to ashes. Only over 20 divine persona fragments, an interspatial ring, and several divine artifacts were left. Among them was a high-grade king-class divine saber, a damaged high-grade king-class divine armor, as well as a high-grade king-class divine warship. And Ji Tianxing paid an extremely small price, only expending a lot of divine power, not even injured at all. The specific process did not need to be described in detail. Anyway, only Ji Tianxing and Qin Yu, two people, knew. Except, Qin Yu's heart was still filled with anger and unwillingness until the moment he died. He hated himself for being careless, actually not expecting Long Tian to be so audacious, actually daring to infiltrate Xuanji Grotto Heaven. And what made him feel unreconciled was that even though he was killed, he could not spread the news. This way, his death was worthless. Battle Dragon King and Xuanji Grotto Heaven's powerhouses still did not guard against Long Tian's existence and might be assassinated by Long Tian. But Qin Yu had no other choice. He could only carry endless regret and unwillingness and fall into silence forever. Swoosh! After Ji Tianxing put away the spoils of war, he quickly put away the primordial chaos bell and appeared in the dense forest. Although he used the primordial chaos bell to conceal his aura, killing Qin Yu inside the god bell should not attract attention. But the current Golden Dragon mountain range had already fallen into chaos. Countless Divine King powerhouses were alarmed and were currently scouting and searching everywhere. Therefore, he could only end the battle quickly to avoid being discovered. After putting away the god bell, Ji Tianxing concealed himself in the dense forest, silently observing the nearby situation. At the same time, he was still considering in his mind, who should he assassinate next? Should he continue to assassinate those divine kings in the chaos, or kill Battle Dragon King in one spurt of energy? Now that Qin Yu was dead, the commander-in-chief overseeing Xuanji Grotto Heaven was only left with Battle Dragon King. Furthermore, Battle Dragon King was seriously injured and had not recovered until now. It was the best time to kill him. Once Battle Dragon King was killed too, Xuanji Grotto Heaven would truly be a group of dragons without a leader. This battle was going to be an easy victory for them. However, at this moment, a deep and dignified voice came from above Ji Tianxing's head. No wonder you can cause such a big mess. So it's because of you, you bastard. The deep voice of the middle-aged man was filled with anger and killing intent. Even though the palaces and residences in the surroundings were in a state of chaos, a boiling cauldron of voices, it was extremely noisy. However, the voice that was filled with killing intent still entered Ji Tianxing's ears very clearly. What followed was a biting cold murderous intent that locked onto him. Ji Tianxing subconsciously raised his head and saw 4 God King experts standing in the air above the forest. 2 of them were wearing golden armor and golden dragon cloak. They were obviously the commanders of the Golden Dragon Guards. And the 2 leading God Kings, Ji Tianxing actually recognized them. The one who spoke was the Battle Dragon King, clad in the purple dragon divine armor and a crown on his head. And beside the Battle Dragon King was a burly middle-aged man in a blood-red long robe. He was the Qiongqi tribe's patriarch, Xue Shang. I've been discovered. This was the first thought that flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. Originally, he was very careful in his actions. He wanted to assassinate Qin Yu before dealing with the Battle Dragon King. He did not expect the Battle Dragon King to detect his presence, and even brought Xue Shang along. Even though this was somewhat out of Ji Tianxing's expectations, it also exposed his whereabouts on the spot and prevented him from assassinating other God Kings. But he was not worried or surprised. After all, this was the headquarters of Xuanji Grotto Heaven, and the Battle Dragon King was a 9th-degree God King expert. How could he not have some tricks and abilities? Since his whereabouts were exposed, there was no need to assassinate anymore. He would just fight openly. After making up his mind, Ji Tianxing transmitted his voice to Hu Xinyue and the left and right protectors. He instructed, "Everyone be mentally prepared. When I give the order later, all of you must kill your way out." Hu Xinyue and Ao Jinying immediately replied, "Young master, we are always prepared. Are you finally going to give the order to attack?" Ji Tianxing then remembered that when he first entered Xuanji Grotto Heaven, he had asked everyone to prepare for battle. But later on, he changed his mind and used a day to assassinate many God Kings. This caused the soldiers to be on edge all this time. Thinking that the upcoming battle situation was somewhat special, he warned the soldiers, Everyone, don't let your guard down. The situation this time is different. I am in Xuanji Grotto Heaven, at their headquarters. Previously, I used a day to assassinate more than 80 god kings and created chaos for them. Now that their headquarters is in chaos, it is the best time to attack. I will deal with their commander. You just need to kill the enemy as soon as possible. After all, the enemy still has 130 god kings and more than 20,000 monarchs. When Ji Tianxing's voice rang out in the divine clock world, the tens of thousands of soldiers were stunned and dumbfounded. In the next moment, countless people regained their senses and erupted into earth-shattering cries and discussions. This is unbelievable! The young master actually sneaked into Xuanji Grotto Heaven. Oh my God! The acting leader is too brave and too quick-witted. The acting leader's courage and wisdom are truly admirable, as expected of the successor appointed by the old leader. Under the leadership of the acting leader, we will definitely dominate the Star Source continent. Sneaking into Xuanji Grotto Heaven alone is like entering a tiger's den. Using his own strength to assassinate so many god kings, this is an unparalleled divine ability. Such an acting leader is simply our unparalleled hero. The acting leader used his own strength to kill almost half of the enemy generals. What are we afraid of? Brothers, let's buck up. Let's use all of our strength and methods to finish the final battle. This time, we must still win beautifully. We must not embarrass the acting leader. In the divine clock world, tens of thousands of soldiers were shouting. Everyone's blood was boiling and their morale was soaring. At the same time, the Battle Dragon King and Bloody War stared at Ji Tianxing and summoned many God King powerhouses to hurry over and surround Ji Tianxing. Even though the Battle Dragon King and Bloody War were currently the strongest people in Xuanji Grotto Heaven, but the two of them were defeated by Ji Tianxing. Facing Ji Tianxing, they did not have the confidence to win at all. Following the Battle Dragon King's order, large batches of God King powerhouses flew out from the palaces in all directions very quickly. Among them were the various regions' domain lords, Golden Dragon Guards captains and commanders, as well as Xuanji Grotto Heaven's consecrators. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was about to be surrounded by dozens of God Kings, the Battle Dragon King's heart finally calmed down a lot. Bloody War, whose expression had been ugly all along, finally recovered to normal. His brows were filled with confidence. Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianxing naturally knew what he was thinking. He could not help sneering and said, "Bloody War, do you think that you can sit back and relax after hugging Xuanji Grotto Heaven's thighs? Don't forget, you swore a heavenly Tao oath previously. If you dare to make a move against this king, you'll definitely be reduced to ashes." Chapter 3774. The fact that Xueshang had been forced by Ji Tianxing to swear a heavenly oath had always been his humiliation, and now Ji Tianxing had mercilessly exposed it in front of the War Dragon King, the two Golden Dragon Guard commanders, and many other godly kings. This enraged Xueshang. His eyes blazed with fury as killing intent surged from his body. In particular, the War Dragon King and the Golden Dragon Guard commanders were stunned as they looked at him strangely. This made him even more ashamed and furious. He wanted nothing more than to cut Ji Tianxing into pieces and grind his bones to dust. The War Dragon King frowned as he stared at Xueshang unhappily. He asked in a low voice, "Xueshang, is this true?" The Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not in the Xuanji Grotto Heaven. A ninth-degree godly king was a top expert and could be of great use. Therefore, the War Dragon King had gladly accepted Xueshang's request to join the Xuanji Grotto Heaven and entrusted him with an important task. At this critical juncture, he needed an expert like Xueshang who had a king-level supreme-grade divine artifact to resist the myriad demon alliance's attack. But if it was as Ji Tianxing had said, and Xueshang had sworn a heavenly oath to never attack Ji Tianxing, then it was a different story. At least, Xueshang's usefulness would be greatly reduced. This disappointed and angered the War Dragon King. Xueshang naturally understood the twists and turns in the story. He hurriedly bowed and apologized to the War Dragon King. He explained softly, "Grand Marshal, please calm down. This matter was also caused by the Taotai tribe's leader, Tao Yongxing." He gave the Battle Dragon King a simple account of what had happened, downplaying his humiliation and scheming. As for his helplessness and Ji Tianxing's treachery, he had to emphasize it. While the two of them were whispering, Ji Tianxing's expression did not change as he observed the godly kings gathered around. But in reality, he secretly released the primordial chaos bell and controlled it with his mind to fly to the other side of the Golden Dragon mountain range. Whoosh! The primordial chaos bell turned into a speck of dust and remained invisible. It also concealed its aura so that no one could detect it. Under the control of Ji Tianxing's mind, the divine bell flew to the other end of the Golden Dragon mountain range and hid outside a house. That area was 10,000 miles away from here, far away from the Battle Dragon King, Xueshang, and the dozens of God King experts. Moreover, the dozens of palaces and mansions in that area were in a state of chaos without a leader. The thousands of divine emperors gathered there were at a loss, full of suspicion, anxiety, and worry. They were like a tray of loose sand. At this time, Ji Tianxing secretly controlled the God Clock to open 6 spatial channels. At the same time, he also gave the order to the tens of thousands of soldiers in the Divine Clock world to attack. Swish! Swish! From the 6 dazzling space swirls, thousands of soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance flooded out. Regardless of whether it was the leading God King powerhouses or the God Lord powerhouses charging bravely, all of them were agitated and excited. They were in a state where their combat strength was off the charts. Kill! Charge! Flatten the Xuanji Grotto and kill all the enemies! The 10,000 Demon Alliance is invincible. The Xuanji Grotto must die. In the blink of an eye, the tens of thousands of soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance all rushed out of the Divine Clock world. They divided into dozens of teams and charged toward the mansions and palaces nearby. They were excited and their blood was boiling. They shouted inspiring slogans and emitted terrifying killing intent and fighting spirit. The divine emperors in the palaces and mansions were in a state of depression, confusion, and helplessness. Many of them were dumbfounded. Seeing the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance suddenly descending from the sky like heavenly soldiers and generals, everyone was dumbfounded. They were scared out of their wits and dumbfounded. Immediately after, a shocking and devastating massacre began. Swish! 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 The soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance rushed forward without caring about their own safety. They released their divine power at all costs and cast divine skill lights and shadows. All kinds of secret killing moves and divine skills were thrown into the crowd without any regard for their own lives. In an instant, the highest point of the Golden Dragon Mountain, an area with a radius of 10,000 miles, was covered by the 7-colored divine light. Earth-shattering battle cries and deafening explosions continued to spread out, waking everyone up. Destructive shockwaves of divine light spread out in all directions, bringing with them a rain of blood, broken limbs, and fragments of divine weapons. They fiercely hit everything in their path. The splendid palaces, the quaint mansions, and the beautiful mountains and rivers were all turned into ruins and ashes in a flash. In just a dozen breaths, hundreds of palaces and mansions were destroyed by the aftermath of the battle. More than 3,000 divine emperors were killed or severely injured on the spot and lost their ability to fight. However, the divine emperors who were shocked and confused finally realized what was going on. Even without the command of the divine kings, they still had captains and commander-level divine emperors who could order them to resist and fight back. Although many of them fought back and joined forces to resist the attacks of the soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance, they were too weak. But very sadly, Their strength was too low and could not withstand the fierce attacks of Divine King powerhouses at all. In addition, they did not have a formation and did not have a unified command. They fought randomly and fought on their own. They could not fight back at all. Naturally, the divine emperors retreated in defeat and suffered heavy casualties. Many people who were afraid of death and had lost their fighting spirit retreated to the mountain peak. They wanted to seek the protection of the Golden Dragon Guards, the Battle Dragon King, and other experts. The soldiers of the 10,000 Demon Alliance did not advance rashly. Under the leadership of the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and others, they fought steadily and steadily. They gradually eliminated the enemies in front of them and pushed forward step by step. On the other side of the Golden Dragon Mountain, Xueshang had already finished explaining to the Battle Dragon King. Although he could not attack Ji Tianxing, he was afraid that he would be punished by the heavens. However, he could deal with anyone other than Ji Tianxing, such as the guardians, elders, and heavenly kings of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Moreover, in order to eliminate the Battle Dragon King's worries, he volunteered to kill the guardians and elders of the 10,000 Demon Alliance. Seeing that he was so sensible, the Battle Dragon King felt relieved. It was also at this moment that more than 40 godly king experts rushed over and surrounded Ji Tianxing. At the same time, on the other side of the Golden Dragon Mountain, more than 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers descended from the sky. Their morale was high as they charged forward. Seeing the sudden appearance of the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers, the Battle Dragon King, Xueshang, and dozens of godly kings were shocked. Their faces were filled with shock and fear. The fact that Ji Tianxing could infiltrate the Xuanji Grotto heaven was already unbelievable. They did not expect that not only did he infiltrate the Xuanji Grotto heaven and assassinate many godly kings, but he also brought more than 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers with him. This despicable fellow was truly sinister and despicable to the extreme. Seeing the palaces and residences being destroyed and thousands of divine emperors being slaughtered by the 10,000 Demon Alliance soldiers, the Battle Dragon King and many other godly kings were so angry that their eyes turned red. However, the Battle Dragon King had a strong will and immediately regained his senses. He did not even think about how Ji Tianxing had managed to bring more than 10,000 soldiers into the Xuanji Grotto heaven. He immediately issued several orders in order to stabilize the situation as soon as possible. Chapter 3775. The War Dragon King had a few orders, but they were clear and went straight to the point. He sent a large number of Golden Dragon Guards to support the Surgods and lead the scattered Surgods to resist the attack of the Myriad Demon League. At this critical moment, no one had the time to comfort the Surgods who were out of their wits. He could only use the noble status and dignity of the Golden Dragon Guards to command those divine emperors and gather them into a powerful force. Of course, Xueshang, who could not attack Ji Tianxing because of the heavenly oath, was also sent by the War Dragon King to deal with the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League. After all, the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League were led by the left and right protectors, a few elders, and the heavenly kings. They were all experts in the 8th and 9th tier of the Divine King realm. The Golden Dragon Guards alone could not deal with them, so Xueshang had to help. Other than these two orders, the War Dragon King also sent a group of Golden Dragon Guards to gather everyone and form a battle formation to fight the enemy. There were hundreds of palaces and mansions that were not attacked or assassinated. There were also more than 80 divine kings and more than 10,000 Surgods. They were only awakened by the commotion of the battle and did not know what was going on. The commanders of the Golden Dragon Guards had to hurry over and gather these people to lead them into battle. This was the only way to stabilize the situation and prevent the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto from collapsing. As for the War Dragon King, he could not personally command the 20,000 soldiers to fight the battle, so he temporarily handed over the power to the Consecrators and the Golden Dragon Guards. He and the 40 God King experts present were going to stay behind to deal with Ji Tianqing. Although the War Dragon King and the 40 Divine Kings formed such a powerful battle formation just to deal with Ji Tianqing, it seemed like he was making a mountain out of a molehill. However, in the War Dragon King's eyes, it was necessary. Although the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League had appeared unexpectedly, they were not afraid of them. Even if they appeared out of nowhere and caused great casualties to the Xuanji Grotto. However, the advantage of surprise would soon be lost. As long as the soldiers of the Xuanji Grotto and the Golden Dragon Guards stood firm and fought back in an orderly manner, the soldiers of the Myriad Demon League would soon be defeated. The one that made the War Dragon King feel uneasy and fearful, and that he had to eliminate as soon as possible, was Ji Tianqing. Firstly, it was because this person's strength was formidable, comparable to a peak Divine King. His strength and methods were extremely shocking. If they did not kill this person, he would definitely be able to stir up a storm and slaughter thousands of soldiers by himself, destroying the entire Golden Dragon Mountain range. Secondly, this person's methods were ruthless, sinister, and despicable, and it was impossible to guard against. In the past few months, the Enigma Grotto had suffered a great loss in front of this person. They had lost all faith. If he did not kill Jiang Chen, there would be changes. Others might not believe it, but the Battle Dragon King was very sure that as long as Ji Tianqing was still alive, he would definitely be able to destroy the Xuanji Grotto and kill everyone there, including him. The Battle Dragon King's hatred, apprehension, and fear of Ji Tianqing had already reached the extreme. In his eyes, Ji Tianqing was even more terrifying than Alliance leader Luo Ho. Haha! War Dragon King, you've gathered so many Divine Kings just to deal with me. You really think highly of me. Ji Tianqing stood in the sky, holding the burial of heaven. He looked at the War Dragon King with a cold smile. The primordial chaos bell that had turned into dust had returned to his hand. Even though the 40 God Kings in the surroundings were the masters of the various regions and the commanders of the Golden Dragon Guards, they were basically middle-level God Kings with high abilities. However, Ji Tianqing was fearless. He did not think much of those intermediate Divine Kings. The War Dragon King's face was as cold as ice. His gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared at Ji Tianqing. He did not mind Ji Tianqing's mockery and said in a low voice, "Your strength and despicableness are worthy of my full strength. Long Tian, it's because I know how powerful you are that I'm so cautious. Because I'll definitely kill you today to rid the world of evil and enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. You sinister and vicious thief, it was your appearance that caused the entire continent to fall into chaos and war, causing countless lives to be plunged into misery and suffering. Hundreds of millions of people were affected." The War Dragon King gritted his teeth and cursed. He did not hide his hatred and resentment for Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing was not angry. He shook his head and smiled coldly. "It's just revenge. Why do you have to use such high-sounding reasons? You're not the heavenly Tao. What right do you have to speak for Tianqing? Also, I can understand your desire to kill me, but you have to face reality. You fell into the void. It's good enough that you managed to survive. You're still heavily injured. With your current condition, even with the help of these Divine Kings, can you really kill me? Haha, you're too naive." The War Dragon King instinctively wanted to retort. However, he suddenly remembered that Xue Shang had mentioned something to him before. He frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly, realization dawned on him. He stared coldly at Ji Tianqing and shouted, "Bastard! You're so confident because of Tao Yongxing's primordial chaos bell? Also, did you bring the people of the Myriad Demon Alliance here with the help of the godly clock?" He immediately found the answer to the questions that he had hidden in his heart. The Battle Dragon King's expression became even more gloomy. His previously confident gaze immediately lost its self-confidence. He was very clear about the power of a supreme-grade, king-grade divine artifact. It was also because of this that he accepted and put Xueshang in an important position. Originally, Xueshang had Patriarch Qiongqi's indestructible golden body, which was just enough to deal with Long Tian. However, that idiot Xueshang actually swore a heavenly Tao oath. The War Dragon King's expression turned even uglier when he thought of this. His chest burned with rage. He did not have a supreme-grade, king-grade divine artifact. He was no match for Long Tian. However, since things had come to this, the War Dragon King would not back down. He would not show any fear or cowardice. The 40 god kings around him were all looking at him. He could not afford to lose their morale. In the blink of an eye, the War Dragon King regained his confidence. He raised his divine spear and shouted, "So what if you have the primordial chaos spell? Since you've entered the mysterious grotto heaven, you'll die here. Kill." The 40 god kings around him had been waiting for a long time. When they heard the order to kill, all of them roared angrily. They waved their divine weapons and unleashed all of their divine power, attacking Ji Tianqing from all sides. In the next moment, divine skill-light shadows that blotted out the sky poured down like a torrential flood, drowning Ji Tianqing. Dozens of formless divine senses also bombarded Ji Tianqing's godhead. Even the space in this area was sealed, making it difficult for Ji Tianqing to move. It was difficult for him to dodge or escape. Of course, the Battle Dragon King didn't stay idle either. He waved his divine spear and unleashed a sky-piercing light that tore through the sky, aiming for Ji Tianqing. He and the 40 god kings attacked together. With such terrifying power, it was almost enough to destroy the mysterious grotto heaven. He was confident that even peak god kings like Luo Ho and the Golden Dragon Emperor would be scared witless in the face of such a terrifying attack. Chapter 3776. Everyone thought that Ji Tianqing was a peak godly king. Actually, he was not. He was just a 7th stage godly king. However, the combat strength he displayed was comparable to a peak godly king. If they really fought, he might not lose to Luo Ho and the Golden Dragon Emperor. However, he was not a true peak godly king after all. His cultivation level had not reached the peak yet. Therefore, he could only avoid the full attack of the Battle Dragon King and the 40 godly kings. Of course, he would not hide in a panic, nor would he be injured by them. If it was in the past, he would use the infinite sky of turbidity to fuse with the heaven and earth to neutralize the attack. However, it was different this time. The Battle Dragon King had just said that he had the primordial chaos spell and thought that it was his greatest trump card. Since that was the case, Ji Tianqing was not willing to reveal more trump cards. At the same time, he wanted to use this opportunity to test how strong the primordial chaos spell's defense was. After all, he had just finished refining the primordial chaos spell not long ago and had not really tested its power. Swoosh! When the sky full of divine arts descended and drowned Ji Tianqing's figure, he suddenly disappeared. His figure disappeared from the sky, leaving behind only a black, dust-like primordial chaos spell. At this moment, the primordial chaos spell was not invisible. It was openly displayed in front of everyone. However, it was too small. The godly kings could only release their divine senses to see its appearance. In the next moment, the overwhelming light of divine spells and all kinds of earth-shattering divine spells bombarded the primordial bell of chaos one after another. Unfortunately, the primordial chaos bell was too small and did not seem to be affected. Most of the divine arts and divine arts brushed past it and landed on the Golden Dragon Mountain. Bam! 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 Boom! Boom! An earth-shattering sound immediately erupted and reverberated through the universe. The terrifying impact caused the entire Golden Dragon Mountain range to shake violently. The Golden Dragon Mountain was formed by the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor's supreme divine arts and was extremely sturdy. However, the Golden Dragon Mountain was unable to withstand such a terrifying bombardment. Immediately, several cracks appeared on the mountain, revealing several huge abysses. That 10,000-mile-long crack was like an abyss, causing people to feel fear just by looking at it. The terrifying shockwaves of divine power also destroyed half of the palaces and residences in the mountain range. Just like that, the once magnificent palace complex, the sacred and majestic Golden Dragon Divine Palace, was reduced to scorched earth and ruins. As far as the eye could see, the entire mountain range was covered in desolation. Only a few dilapidated palaces and a large pile of dilapidated walls remained. Even if the Xuanji Grotto won the battle and wiped out the myriad Demon League soldiers, they wouldn't be happy about it. It was unknown how many years it would take to recover from such a tragic loss. However, this wasn't what angered the War Dragon King the most. What truly infuriated him and made him almost go berserk on the spot was that the full-powered strike from him and the 40 God Kings actually failed to break through the primordial Chaos Bell's defense. The tiny speck of black dust was still floating in the sky, looking very stable and calm. Naturally, Ji Tianqing, who was hiding in the primordial Chaos Bell, was also unharmed. Damn bastard! That stupid bell actually has such a strong defense? The War Dragon King glared at the primordial Chaos Bell as he roared with bloodshot eyes. The 40 God Kings around him were also filled with shock and disbelief. At this moment, the primordial Chaos Bell suddenly disappeared. Everyone hurriedly released their divine senses and used their ultimate skills to search for its whereabouts. They wanted to see where it had escaped to. However, before they could find its whereabouts, a dazzling divine golden sword appeared behind the God Kings out of thin air. Swish! The divine golden sword, which was hundreds of thousands of feet long, was filled with domineering and violent sword intent. It struck the God Kings with an unstoppable momentum. Even though a few God Kings managed to react in time and cast spells to block or teleport away, the space around them had already been frozen. However, the space within a radius of 5,000 kilometers had been frozen, and they were unable to teleport away. Even if they tried to block it, their speed was too slow. Bam! 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 Crack! Boom! Crack! In the next instant, a series of muffled sounds and explosions rang out. The God Kings were sliced in half or sent flying. Shredded corpses and fresh blood rained down from the sky. The God King's screams were still echoing in the sky, but Ji Tianqing had disappeared again. He turned invisible again and looked for the next opportunity to assassinate. The War Dragon King and the other God Kings' expressions changed. Many of them revealed fearful expressions. The 30-odd God Kings in particular were even more tense as they vigilantly watched their surroundings. Even the War Dragon King's heart was in his mouth as he focused his attention. He was also afraid that Ji Tianqing would attack. After all, he wasn't confident that he could block it. Hence, he focused his divine sense to the maximum and enveloped a radius of 50,000 miles, carefully monitoring for any abnormalities. At the same time, he also used his ultimate skills to search for Ji Tianqing's whereabouts and aura. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing appeared again in just a few short breaths. This time, he still attacked a few mid-level God Kings and didn't attack the War Dragon King. When the dazzling sword light lit up, the God Kings were enveloped by the sword intent and revealed looks of despair. The War Dragon King actually heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he didn't attack me. That was probably the thought that flashed through his mind at that moment. Following a series of muffled bangs, 2 more God Kings were assassinated, their heads separated from their bodies. Fortunately, only their bodies were destroyed and their godheads were damaged. They didn't die on the spot. The 2 God Kings were scared out of their wits and lost all will to fight. Their godheads hurriedly left their bodies and flew into the distance. Ji Tianqing prioritized the situation and didn't chase after them. He concealed himself again and looked for an opportunity to assassinate. The situation was still very tense. Only he, the War Dragon King, and 30-odd God Kings remained at the peak of the Golden Dragon Mountain. The 10,000 soldiers of the Myriad Demon Alliance, and the 10,000 soldiers of the Mystical Grotto had long since left this area. More than 20,000 God Lords and 100 God Kings were divided into more than a dozen groups. They were either fighting or fleeing around the Golden Dragon Mountain. Looking at the overall situation, the Mystical Grotto had the advantage in numbers. They were basically attacking the Myriad Demon Alliance's soldiers with numbers. On the battlefield at the end of the Golden Dragon Mountain, Xue Shang was in the limelight. He relied on Patriarch Qiong Qi's indestructible golden body to stand in an undefeatable position. He beat the left and right protectors and the two elders to a pulp. The situation on the other battlefields was similar. The 10,000 God Lords who had no leader were under the command of the Golden Dragon Guard. They had already stabilized their positions and were fighting back in an orderly manner. Although both sides had suffered casualties in the battle, the Myriad Demon Alliance's casualties were obviously more serious. Ji Tianqing only took a moment to look at the situation and realized that the situation was not good. If he couldn't end the battle between the War Dragon King and these God Kings soon, the Myriad Demon Alliance would still lose as time dragged on. Chapter 3777. War was never a simple matter. Moreover, this war concerned the position of the overlord of the Starsource continent. Abstruse Grotto Heaven had controlled the entire continent for more than 20,000 years. Its foundation was unimaginably strong. No matter how confident Ji Tianqing was and how he had planned everything in advance, things were still progressing smoothly. But in the end, the Myriad Demon Alliance was still not assured of victory. In fact, they were slowly losing. Only now did Ji Tianqing realize that he had underestimated Abstruse Grotto Heaven. Things were not as simple as they seemed. If nothing went wrong, even if the Golden Origin Dragon Emperor was not around, the Battle Dragon King and the others could still defend Abstruse Grotto Heaven. Thinking of this, Ji Tianqing became anxious and increased the pace of his attacks. Swoosh! Swoosh! He stopped hiding and looking for an opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Instead, he revealed himself and brandished the Sword of Burial of Heaven. He used all sorts of sword domestiques and killer moves to kill the God Kings. In an instant, the sky above the Golden Dragon Mountain was filled with dazzling sword light. The Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings heaved a sigh of relief when they saw Ji Tianqing no longer hiding. No matter how strong he was, as long as he fought openly, they would not be so afraid. However, after a few moments of fighting, the Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings' hearts tightened again. Ji Tianqing was indeed strong. His methods were ruthless and decisive. After exchanging just over 100 blows, 6 God Kings were killed on the spot. 9 God Kings were severely injured and lost their ability to fight. As for those God Kings whose bodies were destroyed, their godheads flew out of their bodies and fled in panic. But Ji Tianqing did not chase after them. He allowed them to escape and continued to kill the other God Kings. He did this so that he could destroy the combat strength of these God Kings in the shortest time possible and secure victory for the Myriad Demon Alliance. The Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings saw through his intentions. Therefore, they surrounded Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety. They did not expect to kill him on the spot, but they wanted to at least delay him. The War Dragon King told everyone that as long as they could delay Ji Tianqing for an hour, the mysterious Paradise's crisis would be resolved. The surviving God Kings did not think too much about it and believed his word. In their opinion, as long as they could stall Ji Tianqing for an hour, the army of the Myriad Demon Alliance would be slaughtered to the last. By then, there would only be Ji Tianqing left. No matter how strong he would still be blasted into pieces under the siege of over 10,000 Sir Gods and over 100 Divine Kings. However, no one knew that the Battle Dragon King's words actually had another meaning. Swish! The Battle Dragon King and over 20 god kings surrounded Ji Tianqing without any regard for their own safety. Just as he was about to be besieged by the crowd and fall into a dangerous situation, his figure disappeared into thin air. In the next instant, he appeared outside the encirclement like a ghost and attacked one of the god kings as fast as lightning. Boom! As a few sword lights flashed, that god king let out a tragic cry. His head was chopped off on the spot, and his god head shattered into pieces. It was only then that the battle dragon king and the other god kings reacted and rushed over. Everyone's expression was ugly, and their eyes were filled with shock. Especially the battle dragon king, who found it even more unbelievable. He had already joined forces with the others and released nomological powers without any regard for the cost, sealing and confining this area. Logically speaking, Ji Tianqing should have had difficulty moving. He should not have been able to travel through space, much less teleport to evade. However, Ji Tianqing had done it. Moreover, it was smooth as if he was not affected at all. It was also because of this that the Battle Dragon King and the other God Kings' encirclement failed repeatedly. They were unable to delay Ji Tianqing. As time passed, the number of God Kings around the Battle Dragon King rapidly decreased. After 15 minutes, there were only 18 God Kings around him. Moreover, he had been attacked by Ji Tianqing several times. Although he had not been killed, nor had his divine body been destroyed, he had been severely injured, and his combat strength had greatly decreased. What made the Battle Dragon King even more anxious was that as the number of God Kings around him decreased, Ji Tianqing became more and more ferocious. There was no way to restrain or block him. Not to mention the 18 God Kings, even the Battle Dragon King himself was constantly in danger. He could be killed by Ji Tianqing at any time. The Battle Dragon King's heart was burning with anxiety. As he fought bravely, he used all his strength to contend with Ji Tianqing. At the same time, he prayed silently in his heart. I have already restrained Ji Tianqing for so long. You have twice the number of people compared to the Myriad Demon Alliance. Don't disappoint me. And you said you would arrive at the mystical grotto today. Why haven't you appeared yet? If you dare to take advantage of your seniority and ruin my plans, the Dragon Emperor will definitely not forgive you. In the Battle Dragon King's prayer, the first you referred to the 10,000 soldiers of the mystical grotto. As for the second only he knew that they were two super experts. An expert who was even more tyrannical than him. In the sky above a ruin 80,000 miles away from the Golden Dragon Mountain, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and Bai Feng, were still attacking Shueshang together. Below them, more than 4,000 monarch god experts were still fighting fiercely. All of them were bathed in blood. Shueshang had the protection of the indestructible golden body. Up until now, he was still unharmed. It was just that he had used up a lot of his divine power. As for the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and the rest, they were already severely injured. All of them were covered in blood and looked miserable. Their auras were also very weak. After fighting for so long, they knew that Shueshang had a king-grade god artifact to protect him. He was undefeatable. However, they still had to fight to delay Shueshang and prevent him from causing a greater massacre and disaster. One should know that a 9th Heaven Realm God King with a king-grade god artifact would be invincible once he entered the battlefield. He could kill dozens or even hundreds of monarch god experts with a wave of his hand. He could kill more than 1,000 monarch god experts within an hour. Although he was not as powerful as Ji Tianqing, Alliance Master Luoho, or Golden Origin Dragon Emperor, he was still a super killer on the battlefield. However, the left and right protectors, Hu Xinyue and the rest were already severely injured. After fighting with Shueshang for so long, they could not hold on any longer. Everyone looked at the other end of the Golden Dragon Mountain range, where Ji Tianqing and the Battle Dragon King were, as if they were looking forward to seeing them. A few of them were also praying silently in their hearts. Young Master, oh young Master, Quickly settle the battle over there and come help everyone. If you don't come, all the men in our alliance will be killed. Young lord, although you have a perfect plan and are good at commanding troops, there are too few of us. We are no match for Xuanji Grotto Heaven. My lord, even if you don't save us, the two mistresses are still fighting a bloody battle. You should quickly settle the strong enemy over there, and help the two mistresses out. There was no doubt that the last sentence was Bai Feng's prayer. After the tens of thousands of soldiers from the Myriad Demon Alliance left the Divine Clock World, Yun Yao, Jiku, Bai Feng, and Chao Qingyu also left the Nine Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower and joined the battle.